If you've been around YouTube, chances are good you've seen this 2-hour video by Joseph Anderson, Super Mario Odyssey, It's No Masterpiece, in which Anderson lays out the case for why he believes the majority of the game is actually very, very bad. A significant chunk of his argument is based on the fact that the challenges and the puzzles are far too easy, the secrets too simple and quick to be stumbled upon, and the overall narrative lacking in cohesion. Another sizable chunk of his video is dedicated to airing grievances about how every individual moon in a game with 836 unique collectible moons is somehow bad. And personally, I got to wondering, how does it stack up against Super Mario 64, the game from 1996 that's responsible for starting the 3D Mario series? Is it even possible for a game made 20 years in the future to be worse than a game from the 1990s? And if it is, in what ways can we possibly say it's better? Hi, I'm Archaic Noise. In today's episode of Retro vs. Modern, I have an enormous upfront disclaimer to provide to you, the audience. This is absolutely a direct, data-heavy breakdown of both Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Odyssey. My thesis statement, which will be supported by evidence throughout the video, is that Super Mario Odyssey is the logical conclusion of Super Mario 64. It is, in essence, the evolution of its predecessor's design, making it a definitionally better game than its counterpart. That is not to say that Super Mario 64 is a bad game. On the contrary, Super Mario 64 walked so that Super Mario Odyssey could run. However, a significant chunk of this video will be structured around arguments provided by Joseph Anderson from his video Super Mario Odyssey, It's No Masterpiece, because in writing and developing an analysis of both games, I found many of the points from his nearly 4 million view video to be the same kind of incredibly pithy, anti-analysis takes you would have if you were less interested in game design and more interested in pretending you were an intellectual. See, the thing about Joseph Anderson's argument is that it relies heavily on criticizing Odyssey for things I've never really seen people criticize Mario 64 for doing. And through this essay, I'm going to highlight how the two games are incredibly similar in scope and design, despite being developed 20 years apart. Though Odyssey has a modern sheen, the last 2 decades of 3D Mario games has roughly had the same core concept used to design its levels and progression without straying too far from the formula set forward in Mario 64. Rather than abandoning that formula, it took it to further levels by developing that content for a modern audience. But the overall scope of the series has transformed it in the direction of the kind of dream game people would have asked for in the early 2000s. Without further ado, let's get into it. Here's the breakdown. We're going to keep things data light to start by looking over the controls, then move into a section on the narrative, talk a little about secrets in the Mario series, and then delve entirely into the gameplay, which is broken down in multiple sections: star categories, difficulty curve, gimmicks, wait times, and the importance of moons. So, to properly address the differences between the two games, we need to talk about controls. One of the ways that Anderson insists Mario Odyssey is a bad game is in the sense that the overall control scheme, and by extension the way you're encouraged to control your character, provides you with a very limited move pool that's harmful to the gameplay experience. What I want to do here is compare it to one of the highest rated puzzle platformers of all time and see how it stacks up. What does Odyssey do differently, and how does it change the formula to provide better movement than its predecessor? Here's a list of all of Mario's abilities in Super Mario 64. Mario can move with the control stick. He can run by holding it fully in one direction or walk by holding it partially in one direction. Mario can jump by pressing A. Mario can crouch by pressing the Z button. Mario can punch by pressing the B button. Mario can double jump and triple jump by pressing A in succession. This gives more height on each successive jump. Mario sticks to walls when you hold the control stick towards one, which allows him to perform a wall jump in the opposite direction. Mario's movement while crouching allows him to crawl. If you press the jump button while crouching and standing still, you'll do a backflip. If you run in one direction, then hold the control stick in the opposite direction and press A, you'll do a somersault backwards. While in midair, you can press Z to do a ground pound. If you run forward and press B, you'll lunge forward into a dive, which damages enemies. If you press the B button while in midair, you'll do a kick, sending Mario backwards and dealing damage to enemies. If you run forward and crouch, you'll enter a slide. You can then press B to do a slide kick. While in a slide, you can press the A button to perform a long jump. You can also change the camera around with the C buttons, as well as enter a first-person camera angle to look around. In Super Mario Odyssey, Mario can no longer punch, kick, crawl, or slide kick. He can, however, do the additional following abilities. Mario can now roll. If you press Y after crouching, you'll launch into a roll, and by tapping the button, you can speed up and roll further. After performing a ground pound, Mario can press A to activate a ground pound jump that gives roughly twice the height of a regular jump. Mario can propel himself quickly underwater by using the same combination of buttons as a roll. This causes him to spin and swim at faster speeds. In addition to full-range control of the camera, there is now a snapshot mode that can be used to take pictures in the overworld. This is effectively the same as the first-person camera, with some additional functionality. Mario now has Cappy, who has replaced his hat and can do 8 different things with him. Capture. When Mario throws his cap at certain enemies, he can capture and control them. He then gains a specific ability related to whatever creature he captured. This will be detailed in the gameplay section. Hold. When Mario throws his cap, he can hold the Y button down to have Cappy spin in place wherever he's thrown. Upward throw. This is a motion control option that allows Mario to throw Cappy up and interact with objects above him. Downward throw. After executing a ground pound, throw Cappy to make him roll along the floor in one direction. Spin throw. After spinning in a circle with the control stick, throw Cappy to cause him to spin in an expanding circle around Mario, activating objects he touches. Cap jump. While Cappy is held in place, interacting with him causes Mario to bounce upwards, which allows him to execute additional jumps while in midair. Homing cap throw. This is a motion control option that causes Cappy to interact with the nearest object after being thrown. Granted, 2 of these options are only usable with motion controls, but even ignoring those, we still have roughly 10 new abilities to replace the 4 or so we lost from Mario 64, for a grand total of 25 abilities in Mario Odyssey compared to 18 in Mario 64. For all intents and purposes, though Mario can no longer punch or kick, he has roughly the same damaging power he did in previous Super Mario games. Crawling was also never really utilized to its full extent or utilized much at all throughout Mario 64, so its deprecation is not at all surprising. Here's the thing about the controls. Mario in 3D space has always controlled a little awkwardly. It can be rather difficult to manipulate Mario in the direction you want and properly execute the jumps and actions required to complete puzzles and challenges unless you're relatively familiar with the way Mario moves. This is entirely true of everything in Super Mario 64. It's not all that hard to go through the game without ever long jumping, and moves like kicking in midair or crawling have no real required purposes that aren't covered by other moves Mario can use. Likewise, throughout large sections of Super Mario Odyssey, the majority of Cappy's controls, especially the motion control options, are rarely, if at all, required to complete any challenges or puzzles. The additional height gained by grabbing Cappy and then executing a jump isn't required to do anything in the game, it's just a nice little feature for anyone who wants to do an additional flourish with Mario's moves, allowing them a little more choice in their overall freedom of motion. I would like to make a brief aside to talk about the Game Boy game released in 1994, Donkey Kong. Though it opens with a recreation of the original Donkey Kong arcade levels, it opens up into a series of unique specialized levels made just for Mario to run through and rescue Pauline as he chases Donkey Kong to his tower at the far end of the Earth. If you watch the intro cutscene, you'll see Mario performing every one of his moves in sequence, and while this little cutscene doesn't give you controls instructions, it does provide a clear primer on what Mario's abilities are and how they get used with respect to gameplay elements you'll encounter throughout the game. And this is where the critique begins.
That sequence of events, jump, throw, dive, bounce, throw, is what you'll be doing again and again. Whether you do the full combo or only need part of it, every jump that isn't a normal jump in Odyssey will be right there. For a game that only uses 3 buttons on the gamepad, only 2 of them face buttons, that's a missed opportunity for some more options. Even Super Mario World has a second type of jump with its own dedicated button. For me, this is Odyssey's fatal problem that made most of my time with it a huge chore, even when I was going out of my way to try to break out of sequence and be creative with getting around, trying really hard to find the fun.
There are no 3D Mario games with a second dedicated specialized jump button. There has never been a second type of dedicated jump button in a mainline 3D Mario game. The closest mechanic you could argue is a second dedicated jump button is the rocket nozzle from Super Mario Sunshine, and that's not an ability Mario has, it's a temporary upgrade for specific shines that you unlock in the latter half of the game. This is one of the places where I think I take the most exception to some of Anderson's arguments. If we really look closely and analyze the differences in Mario's movements and abilities, we find that he really doesn't have that much extra tacked on in Odyssey when compared to the other mainline 3D Mario games. Mario can do basically everything listed in some way, shape, or form across the series, and none of the challenges ask for much more than what's been presented. What every Mario game does have in common more than just their controls is their control gimmicks. In Super Mario Sunshine, Mario can use Flood, his backpack water cannon, to put out fires and damage enemies, as a jetpack to hover and launch himself in the air, and shoot water backwards to travel rapidly across land. In the Galaxy games, shaking the Wiimote allows Mario to do a spin that can stun enemies or allow you to do a little hop in midair, giving Mario an extra boost at the end of his jump. Super Mario Odyssey has the entirety of the Cappy mechanic, which we'll get into, and Super Mario 64's gimmick is the camera. It's the first 3D Mario game, and the whole idea of how you interact with the game world effectively manipulated your ability to only see one angle of the world at a time, so they could hide things just out of sight that required understanding the camera in order to find and complete. This is also the reason for the first-person view in cannons. It would probably have been easier to aim them from a third-person perspective, but seeing it from Mario's view angle was an opportunity they chose not to pass up, one we should all be thankful for. There's another critique Anderson makes in his video that I don't want to spend too much time on. Mario's movement speed in Odyssey is tied to a really specific sequence of chained cappy jumps and rolling, sort of the same way that Mario's movement speed in 64 is tied to long jumping and mid-air diving. Admittedly, some of the movement controls in Odyssey have been nerfed from what they were in 64. Wall kicks are functionally much weaker, the long jump is no longer the enormous movement boost it once was, and I'm of the opinion that these changes were meant not as a slight to people to prevent them from breaking the game, but as a part of a design philosophy that prioritizes a different kind of movement through the game world. Mario might be the star of the show, but Cappy is meant to be a co-star, so his participation in everything you do to interact with platforming challenges and puzzles means that they likely wanted to discourage players from trying to find solutions that fell outside of the purview of his abilities. The last thing we'll talk about here is the camera controls, which are significantly improved thanks to the Switch being a system with a second control stick. Whereas on the Nintendo 64, the only way to control the camera was to move it around with the C buttons, the camera in Odyssey has a full 360-degree range of motion, though this doesn't stop them from using forced perspective selectively throughout the game to provide more interesting set pieces. The camera has been elevated from a gimmick to a standard, and its overall control leaves very little to be desired. To sum up, while Super Mario Odyssey controls differently than Super Mario 64, its overall control scheme still captures the same essence of Mario's original 3D movement while adding its own spin with the Cappy mechanic. Narrative. When we want to talk about things from a narrative perspective, we have to look at all the different ways that modern games attempt to tell their story to the player. There's cutscenes, where unique camera angles can be used to showcase enemies and bosses in special situations. There's dialogue, where one or more characters can explain situations to each other and talk about what they want and what they need. There are lore books and in-game guides, where you can browse through information you've collected over the course of the game and review detailed information about the world. We'll go over each of these in tandem, but of course we should start with the obvious: there is almost no narrative whatsoever in Mario games. Both of these games involve the same story. Bowser has kidnapped Princess Peach again, and it's Mario's job to go through a series of hoops and hurdles to rescue her. 3D iterations of the franchise created this idea of having individually themed levels in contained spaces, rather than a series of levels that all followed a theme and represented a world like its 2D predecessors. That being said, the narrative over the course of the game isn't staggeringly different by any stretch of the imagination. You go through a series of worlds helping the inhabitants, and you're rewarded with power stars that, when collected together, give you the power to access new and imaginative locations to collect more power stars. The biggest fundamental difference between these two is that in Mario Odyssey, they're called power moons. What we want to look at when we ask about the narrative in a mainline Mario game, 3D or otherwise, is what it actually shows the player from its very limited scope of interactions. How does the player interact with the world to advance on their quest? Is there any way to develop an emotional attachment with the characters in a game this limited in its narrative construction? Does it manage to build a fully fleshed out world that feels lived in? There are about 170 dialogue boxes in the entirety of Mario 64. This has been ripped from the game's files on a repository that's listed on Wikipedia. There's about this much dialogue in the first 2 hours of gameplay in Mario Odyssey. So strictly speaking, from the standpoint of taking things in the aggregate, there's probably 11 times as much actual spoken words by characters on the screen in Mario Odyssey than there is in Mario 64. Admittedly, this is not very much. It is a Mario game after all. But knowing what we know about spoken dialogue, it's pretty hard to form an emotional attachment with silent characters, so the more the better. The thing is, as far as emotional attachment is concerned, it's not really possible to get more than positive vibes out of Mario characters regardless of what game you end up playing in the series. Nothing complicated ever happens. No one ever really dies outside of maybe 1 or 2 people, if any, in basically any Mario game they've ever put out. There's no deeply complicated storylines or emotionally challenging situations that you would find yourself cheering on. You can try all you want to look deeper than the surface, but you're wading in the kiddie pool, so there's not very much hiding under the top layer of the water. When we compare these two games and their cutscenes, Mario 64 basically has its opening cutscene, its ending cutscene, and, well, almost nothing else. You could look at a few specific instances: the chain chomp breaking out of its cage, the top of the pyramid spinning around and exploding, Bowser spinning up and disappearing after you defeat him. But beyond that, there really aren't any cutscenes where interesting things happen in the game world that aren't directly initiated by you, the player. Everything is mostly static and happens only as a direct response to your interaction with other characters, not as a matter of cinematic purpose, with the intent of driving the plot or the characters towards some kind of goal. Compare and contrast this with Mario Odyssey, which has cutscenes in every level, cutscenes around every boss fight, cinematics related to situations that occur as you change things in the landscape of the game. I'm thinking mostly about New Donk City's whole festival with Pauline, because those modern sensibilities have been a staple of the series since Sunshine. Every level in the game has a panning shot at the beginning of the level that showcases its entirety and scope, allowing you to get a glimpse of what you're going to be dealing with and create a mental picture in your head of the whole thing at a distance. Boss cinematics. Boss cinematics are almost the same between the two games, even despite the modern sensibilities that led to the creation of the cutscenes in Odyssey. Bosses in Odyssey only really have 5 to 10 seconds of lead time where you get to see the whole boss at a distant zoomed out camera angle before they have maybe one piece of throwaway dialogue and then start attacking. In Mario 64, there's no big establishing shot showing you the bosses in every instance because the bosses aren't so big that they can't just fully fit on the screen when you first arrive and start looking at them. The most obvious point of order here is that things in Odyssey are a little better in terms of establishment. You don't have to worry about the player being confused or lost when they approach a boss, because the establishing shot provides almost all the context needed to understand what's going on. That's not even to say that there aren't examples of this kind of thing happening in Mario 64, but when they try to follow this logic, they often fail. Take for example the main fight against Wiggler in the star Make Wiggler Squirm on Tiny Huge Island. When you enter Wiggler's arena for the first time, your camera can get completely caught on the platform hanging above and attempt to zoom in on the Wiggler standing below, but instead it just zooms in on the platform, showing you nothing. The dialogue box allows you to get a feeling for what's happening, but it's not entirely clear what you're supposed to do to win the fight beyond jumping on him, since that's one of the only things available in Mario's toolkit in the game. So then you do it, and he replies with another dialogue box, then another. It's certainly a conversation you're having, but it's not a particularly clever one. Compare and contrast this with the Mecha Wiggler fight in Odyssey, in which you're not only given a primer for the scope and scale of the enemy you're fighting, but you're launched backwards and away from New Donk's tallest building into a battle arena where there's a tank sitting nearby. Just like in Mario 64, it's not entirely clear what you're supposed to do, but you can guess based on context that a tank is sitting next to you for a reason. So you possess the tank and start firing cannonballs at the Wiggler's lit up parts. And once you've hit all of them, Cappy pops up with a dialogue box asking, "Is this our chance?" which is meant to prompt you to fire again to deal damage to the boss. None of this is particularly complicated. It's not particularly robust either, but it is a storytelling tool that they use throughout the game to guide you through boss encounters. The establishing shot, followed by a minor amount of interjection from existing characters, followed by the boss fight itself, and then some wrap-up cutscene of the boss getting defeated, maybe some more minor interjection, and you move on to the next point. Simple, but effective. Mario 64 had most of this, but it just didn't really have all the set pieces in the right places, and the more correctly designed modern counterpart to these didn't become the standard until the release of Sunshine 7 years later. Lorebooks and guides. Odyssey absolutely has something 64 doesn't, and that's lorebooks and guides. You can go into your map menu and get a detailed breakdown of every map, along with icons that show the locations of important features and a list of all the power moons available in the kingdom. The guides are written like actual tourist maps that you would find in old school tourist traps, and there's actually a video game guide that I've seen that follows this exact formula, the Earthbound Player's Guide from 1994. Little side notes about the local flora and fauna, descriptions of characters and important locations, detailed breakdowns of enemies you might encounter. Mario Odyssey doesn't check all of these boxes, but this is honestly one of the coolest in-game features I've seen a modern game include for the player, and it's not just highly functional, it also provides a checklist for 100% completion. Everything about this is really fun and well designed, and because it's an in-game feature instead of an external supplemental product, its accuracy is much less likely to be questionable. As a quick aside, in addition to lore books, there's also an action guide where you can get a quick video showing and explaining how to execute each of Mario's moves. I don't need this feature. I'm sure the vast majority of people who would watch a video like this also have no need for it, but it's nice to have the option for people who are casual players to get an in-depth guide explaining how to play the game, and it's the kind of tutorializing that most gamers say they absolutely despise, so it's also pretty cool that it's optional. Creating these kinds of in-game tutorials also makes it so players don't have to run to the internet to look up YouTube videos explaining how they roll Cappy along the ground or whatever, so it ends up cutting out a lot of the unnecessary middleman work. Here's the thing about the guides. While also doubling as a map of the location you're in and providing fast travel options to checkpoints, their checklist of available moons doesn't reveal the names of moons until after they're collected. But in the post-game, the newly available moons are marked on your map. Here's a clip of Anderson talking about his problems with the guides.
Instead, the vast majority of the moons that are unlocked in this stage are just floating in the sky, or require ground pounds, or very simple requirements like hitting something shiny. We've already gone through these moons, but I want to stress this point. These are moons added after you've seen an ending. Not only that, they have treasure follow the X-style markers on the map and mini-maps so you can't even miss them. They're busy work, an excuse to explore each world again, perhaps for a third or fourth time now, with no major changes in enemy presence or challenge, just more and more filler moons.
There's a section we'll go over in Secrets where Anderson talks at length about how the game's secrets are too difficult to find, but here, his biggest complaint is that the game is holding your hand too much and making it too easy to find moons. While I find this inconsistency annoying, I'm of the opinion that this entire situation could have been fixed by providing grayed out names of moons after completing the level for the first time, allowing players to use the names of those moons as hints to their locations within each kingdom. This is, for all intents and purposes, a very minor nitpick. It is not the kind of thing that should represent a disastrous problem that damages your ability to enjoy the game. But the reason we're bringing this up in the narrative section is because the names of moons are also a narrative tool that informs you about the context surrounding your exploration of the game world. If you read the name of a fishing moon, you're gonna understand that you need to find a Lakitu somewhere in the level, which would empower you to look for one specifically. The same is true of any category. You might read the word scooter in Toast Arena and look for a place near the town, because that's where a scooter is most likely to be sitting. That doesn't mean that the names of moons don't provide some background to what the platforming challenges you complete are comprised of, but because you can only view them after the fact, it becomes less of a storytelling tool that attempts to lead you towards interesting content, and more of a collection of stickers that you put in a scrapbook. This is arguably part of the reason some of the emotional catharsis experienced throughout the game can feel so middling for a large number of people who have played through it. Emotional catharsis. What are the big button moments in Odyssey? Very little beyond Pauline and Jump Up Superstar, the bosses, and crashing into the Lost Kingdom. So where are the big button moments in Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Odyssey? The answer may not surprise you, there are almost none. Again, it's a Mario game. We don't expect Game of Thrones, we don't expect Uncle Ben dying in the newest iteration of Spider-Man. No one, and I mean no one, is about to compare anything written here to Shakespeare. In Super Mario 64, there aren't really any emotional moments in the story. There are a few moments where you might be able to find some interest in the characters or note some little quirks about them. Maybe you like Koopa the Quick Steez, or maybe you think the Big Boo at Boo's Haunted Mansion is a real spooky character. Regardless, there's almost no depth to any of the characters, and there's not really much going on behind the scenes. Even the idea of doing a close reading on this is kind of silly. As a quick aside, something that Mario 64 has that Odyssey doesn't: death animations. The number of death animations in Super Mario 64 is legitimately comical. He is straight up dying Acme-style deaths in the majority of circumstances, and there's a phenomenal video on Retro Archive called Every Way to Die in Super Mario 64. 12 minutes, highly worth a watch, genuinely recommend you go check it out. To give a quick summary, Mario has some really funny death animations, including his absolutely brutal drowning death, or how he falls over after being electrocuted. By their count, there's roughly 132 unique deaths, though there's only like 10 or so actual animations associated with all those death types. Nothing about this is really emotional, especially since it's so cartoony that it feels like watching Wile E. Coyote get crushed by a rock while trying to eat the Roadrunner, but it is a cool feature. The two big button moments in Odyssey are the festival in New Donk City and the final battle where you possess Bowser with Cappy to escape from the collapsing moon stage. In the former, you're not just given a giant, vibrant celebration that you've managed to make possible by restoring power to the city and getting the band together, you're also given a retro blast from the past where you play through a 2D section while Donkey Kong throws barrels at you. It's fun, it's bright, it's got a catchy little pop tune sung by a real singer with a real voice. Mario games have never been heavy on voice acting. A lot of people cite this as one of the best parts of the game. The latter is not just the typical Bowser takedown, now it's an escape with a twist. Mario possesses Bowser with Cappy, and now you can use his abilities to help you escape with Princess Peach from the collapsing moon dungeon. You slash through blocks with his claws, blow them up with his fire breath, and even get a 2D section where you get to use Bowser's original sprite to break through a bunch of blocks to the other side. The whole arrangement caps off with a button mash competition at a moon block at the end of the sequence, and then everyone collectively jumps into a spark wire and goes careening back to safety on Earth. People literally couldn't stop talking about this for weeks after the game dropped. It was, to put it lightly, a cultural moment for Mario. Despite these incredibly fun moments throughout the rest of the game, there isn't really emotional catharsis, so to speak, but the world does feel mostly lived in. And by that, what I mean is that there are characters wandering around the world who you can interact with. Toasterenans in Toast Arena, or Donkers in New Donk City, or Chiverians in Chiveria. People who don't have a lot to say, but they have a little something to contribute. In Mario 64, the closest thing you could find to a friendly inside a level was a Pink Bomb waiting to open the cannon, Dory swimming around the lake in Hazy Maze Cave, or the penguins in Cool Cool Mountain. They don't talk much, and even when they do, it's not entirely clear what they're doing in the spaces they're in, beyond the fact that they're aesthetically linked. In Odyssey, you've got a lot of NPCs scattered around the landscape, contributing at least a little something to the world they're inhabiting. There's someone playing with a jump rope in New Donk City's Central Park. There's some folks playing beach volleyball in Bub Lane. There's sentient fork people cooking up a stew in the little village below Mount Volbono. Is it legendary storytelling that makes the world feel truly deep? Of course not, but it's about what you'd expect for a mainline installment in the Mario franchise. One of the worst complaints in Anderson's video is his insistence that the kingdoms aren't called anything. Here's a clip of him talking about it.
It actually blows my mind that the names of each kingdom in Odyssey wear how plain they are on their sleeves. There are 17 kingdoms in Odyssey, and look at them. The Sand Kingdom, Snow, Lake, Seaside, Cloud, Wooded. The most interesting names are Metro, Moon, Ruined, Luncheon, and Bowser's. The last one because Bowser's Kingdom could pretty much be anything with a name like that. But most of these have themes that we've seen many times before, and in the few cases that we haven't, are really mundane.
The names are right there. They're right there, dude. Literally every kingdom has a subtitle that tells you what its name is. Bonneton, Fossil Falls, Toast Arena, Lake Lamode, Steam Gardens, Nimbus Arena, Forgotten Isle, New Donk City, Shiveria, Bub Lane, Mount Volvono, Crumble Den, Bowser's Castle, Honeyloon Ridge, Peach's Castle, and Rabbit Ridge. You're mad because they didn't just flip these around? Like, okay, fine, it's not necessarily a bad critique, but it's not worth getting bent out of shape over it. I get that you want all these places to stand out as their names, and for what it's worth, I agree that they probably should have used the titles as their names and kept the kingdom label as a subtitle. But are we really gonna get so pithy about this critique that we pretend they didn't make every one of these places a totally bespoke location with its own backstory? Because they did that. That's a thing they did. If you're pretending they didn't do that to make a point, you'd have to be pretending, get this CinemaSin shit out of here. And these would collectively make up a problem from the perspective of someone analyzing the story if anyone was actually analyzing it. Let's be real, the story of Mario is barely a story at all. You can do a close reading on this, you can make your suppositions, you can argue from the pulpit about the true meaning of the Mario series, but I genuinely believe that there are far more emotionally and intellectually deep stories out there that deserve that kind of attention over Super Mario. In the broad strokes, it's kind of meant to be a play. I mean, if you look back at some of the Nintendo side content over the years, there's this implication that Bowser and Mario and Peach are actually friends behind the scenes, and the stage aesthetic that's been featured throughout the series was originally an integral part of Super Mario Bros. 3's design on the NES. This particular framing device is meant to show that the players, not you, the player, but the people playing the characters on stage, are acting out scenes for the amusement of an audience. That's you, the player. That's part of why no one ever really dies in the series, no one ever really experiences any kind of transformative events that change their outlook or opinions for the most part, and no one ever really interacts beyond a surface level. I'm keeping this vague because there are exceptions to the rule, but almost all of them come from the 3 different Mario RPG series that have been developed since the 90s. And I think this speaks to one of the bigger problems people have with Odyssey's design, which is that it's exceedingly simple at times. I can't imagine there was any real justification for not calling these kingdoms by their real names, but the world map certainly looks a lot more streamlined and easy to understand when the actual labels for the places you visit are boiled down to cardinal location types like lake, jungle, forest, desert, city, etc. And the thing is, this wouldn't be the first Mario game to do it. The release of Donkey Kong on the Game Boy in 1994 had levels named exactly the same way. There's a surprising amount of influence from that game referenced here, and I can't help but think it's at least a little intentional, especially considering the other elements that make an appearance. The 2D side-scrolling sections where Donkey Kong's featured, the inclusion of Pauline in the main storyline, and the overall construction of Mario's abilities. And part of that is what Odyssey represents. It's a fresh take on the future while trying its hardest to return to its roots. And where it possesses some of its deepest roots is in its secrets. Secrets. We all know about secrets in Mario. Finding the warp pipe in the level 1-2 underground and skipping a third of the game is such a tired bit by this point that it's been done in multiple Mario games beyond the first. Clever little referential nods to its past are also a long-standing tradition in games like these, as Nintendo has a near 40-year canon of inspiration and references to draw upon. The thing about secrets in both games is that they both serve the same purpose, to provide you with stars and moons to allow you to gain a little bit of extra progress towards your goal of collecting enough to rescue the princess. In Mario 64, this takes place almost entirely outside the course of the main levels. 2 of the 3 cap entrances are inside the castle, while 1 is buried deep in Hazy Maze Cave, and the other secret stars come from levels like the one opposite Rainbow Ride, the Princess's Secret Slide, and the aquarium adjacent to Jolly Roger Bay. Secrets in Odyssey are more or less just a normal facet of gameplay, but they still count as secrets in the sense that you have to be really attentive or actively scouring levels in order to find them. Knowing that you can use quicksand to access hidden areas in Toast Arena requires you to take a gamble and attempt to sink partway down while trying to squeeze into a gap, just like in Mario 2. Finding the art moons requires looking in every nook and cranny until you stumble upon the giant paintings that let you jump into other levels. Some of the worst moons in the game require you to kick a rock as many as 50 times to reveal a moon, a nondescript one, so it's virtually impossible to tell at first glance whether you're kicking the right rock until you've kicked it 50 times. And that's why Anderson hates the secrets in Odyssey.
Bench friends. There's a problem that infests and rots any game when there's a lot of copy and pasted content, especially in something close to a collectathon like Odyssey. In other 3D Marios, you're given a hint for what objective you're currently on. In Odyssey, you only get that for the main quests in each kingdom. The rest of the moons are blank on these lists here. They could be anything, they could be anywhere. There is a hint system, but that's clearly a last-ditch effort, a safety net. If you're actually meant to run to this parrot and get a hint for every moon, then the game is even more tedious and drawn out than I thought. So when you get a moon like Bench Friends, your heart should sink so low that your thong should get heavy. Bench Friends implies that there are other moons like Bench Friends. This moon is a reward for sitting down next to a guy and waiting for a moment. If you see another guy on another bench, you should do it again just in case they have moons too.
There's this whole section in Anderson's video where he gets legitimately mad at the bench moon. The bench moon, Bench Friends, is where there's just a guy sitting on a bench in New Donk City. He's lonely or something. It's clearly just a nondescript guy sitting on a bench in the middle of the city. But if you sit down next to him, you get a moon. Anderson's problem is that this is indicative of enormous issues with the gameplay in Mario. That it's too easy to get moons, but also that it's not entirely clear what you're supposed to do to get them, which in part makes it both too easy and too hard to collect all the moons in the game. There's another very consistent argument throughout the video that mentions copy-pasting, that lots of the moons in the game are lazy because they're copy-pasted, not bespoke, not crafted for a particular purpose or platforming challenge, and that this represents both a laziness and unwillingness on the part of Nintendo to deliver the quality of game they could or should have delivered. To put this in simple terms, Anderson wants to have his cake and eat it. One of the easiest and fastest ways they could telegraph that sitting on a bench with another person might result in a moon is by placing one of those moons in another level. But as soon as that happens, they immediately become an example of copy-pasting, which according to the essay is also a detriment to the game's design. He feels as if the bench moon is too far out of left field, too difficult to suss out as a possible moon without slightly more instruction or hinting from the game, while simultaneously believing that any amount of copy-pasting is unacceptable. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. Even noting this, here's the thing. Secrets in Mario have never been aggressively clever, and they've never really been aggressively difficult either. The secret stars in Mario 64 are very similar in that they're not really all that secret, they're not really all that difficult, and some of them are just straight up handed to you by Toad. Finding them doesn't make you feel like a genius, and completing the associated challenges feels exactly the same as collecting any other star in the game. That can pretty obviously be contrasted with 2D Mario in a lot of ways. Sometimes you really do feel like you've stumbled on something you could never have found on your own in games like Super Mario World, but this design decision to make a lot of secrets relatively easy to discover is one that's been with the 3D iterations of the series for decades. And that should come as no surprise, the secrets in games like Super Mario World had to be placed in ways that followed the standards set forth in earlier 2D Mario games, requiring you to jump off screen or find special warp pipes. With the inclusion of keys, keyholes, the cape, and Yoshi, things got more complicated, but mostly stayed within the realm of experience, just with a little more button pressing. Now there's this whole section where Anderson details what he refers to as shrines in Super Mario Odyssey. He's referencing Breath of the Wild shrines, which are miniature puzzle dungeons where you complete challenges and are rewarded with a spirit orb, which, much like pieces of heart in previous games, makes up 1/4 of a permanent upgrade to your health or stamina. This is contrasted to the secrets in Mario Odyssey, which provide no permanent upgrades, but instead provide 1 or 2 moons for completing the platforming challenge. His analogy rests on this comparison. The idea that shrines are separate, dedicated areas where the game provides a certain amount of its challenges and content that are locked away behind doorways or instanced locations. The Mario Wiki has these listed as secret areas because many of them are some combination of difficult to find or unlocked as a result of story progress and completion, so I am going to call them secret areas moving forward. There's a variety of reasons why shrines and secret areas are functionally different. For starters, shrines are enormous landmarks that dot the map of Hyrule so you can get your bearings. They don't just serve as very obvious flagpoles out in the wilderness, they also have a teleportation function that allows you to instantly travel between shrines you've discovered. This movement mechanic is arguably one of the most important features in an open world game. Secret areas, on the other hand, can be identified by their signature doorways emblazoned with a hat, but are often placed off the beaten path and meant to be hidden around corners or behind level geometry. Even the ones that are obvious don't serve as markers. checkpoint markers do that, and some of them are close to secret areas, checkpoints are also this game's fast travel option, not secret areas. More importantly, the scope and character of the content within both features is very important. Listen to Anderson talk a little about how he feels about shrines in Breath of the Wild.
The biggest letdown of these challenge rooms is the same failing of the majority of shrines in Breath of the Wild. They introduce some fun ideas and then do little with them. As I am writing this script, I am constantly having to go back into Adobe Premiere to refresh my memory about the shrines, because they were all so forgettable. The worst ones are the shrines centered on a possessed enemy. Not all of these are bad, but most stay too simple because of the lack of options on the possessed form and uninspired levels. There are 2 of these shrines devoted to tank shooting galleries, which are the opposite of fun, made worse by one of these returning later to be an arena for Yoshi to eat apples in. Remember in Super Mario World you would eat apples for coins and mushrooms? Yeah, in Odyssey they're moons instead. Almost every shrine has 2 moons in it, a main one and a secret one, not unlike the orb and the secret chest in Breath of the Wild shrines. It's sort of eerie how many comparisons can keep being drawn between these games.
This, right here, this was fate. This was kismet. I have been blessed by the algorithm. The Yanaga Shrine is the exact shrine I used to talk about dungeon design in my first Retro vs. Modern video. To sum up in simple terms, the puzzle contained here is more complicated mechanically than any puzzle that had ever been in the entirety of Ocarina of Time. And I know what you might be thinking. I solved that without any trouble, so how could it possibly be complicated? Complications don't make something difficult, or at least not difficult to solve. Here, you have so many discrete elements working together in tandem. You have a stone block attached to a rail, a bomb funnel for spherical blocks, and a ceiling with cracked blocks. As the cracked blocks can't be destroyed by the block, you have to place a stationary bomb on the block, use a spherical bomb to launch the block upwards towards the ceiling, only to activate your stationary bomb at the apex of its movement. Then you have to use another rolling bomb in the bomb funnel to propel yourself into the sky using the paraglider to gently float downwards. You have the physics associated with moving blocks, the physics associated with blocks attached to rails, the relative movement of the block in relation to an explosion, the relative destruction of blocks in relation to an explosion, a funnel that allows a bomb that's not stationary to become a stationary bomb, the timing window between 2 bomb uses, the timing window for using the paraglider, and finally the movement of Link through the physics engine that allows him to be launched into the air without hitting the ceiling and then float gently to the floor. 8 mechanics, all of them working in tandem to become something greater than the sum of their parts. You aren't simply blowing up a wall or throwing a bomb across a chasm to break something a little further away than normal. You aren't just using an item you found to bridge a gap or hit a target. You're interacting with a fully fledged physics engine, and everything in that engine straight up works. No fuss, no problems. The reason people were mad wasn't because the puzzles were too easy. They were mad because they were used to getting a fully fledged dungeon every time they went inside a cave. Now, to cut to the chase, none of the secret areas in Mario Odyssey have enormous mechanical physics that haven't been implemented in a Mario game before. For the most part, a pretty significant number of elements featured in this game aren't groundbreaking mechanics, they're by-the-book platforming with a modern sheen. However, the capture gimmick plays an important role in elevating as many as half of these secret areas into a more interesting iteration of what they would have been without it. Catching a lava bubble to jump between lava streams, a paragoomba to fly through foggy areas, a frog to jump over a poison swamp. It's an interesting twist on something that has only loosely existed in Mario's previous games, but not in quite the same fashion, if only because Sunshine and Galaxy were very particular about their level construction. More importantly, secret areas do not have puzzles in them. Let me repeat that, platforming challenges are not puzzles. Yes, there is occasionally an element that may or may not be obvious at first glance, like the one in the moving 2D section in the Mushroom Kingdom, which is post-game content. But for the most part, every platforming challenge can be immediately understood and its criteria ascertained simply by moving towards it and pressing A. In some cases, you move towards an enemy, throw Cappy at it, and then start pressing A. It's not complicated at all. In fact, it's so straightforward a child could do it. And though it manages to combine different platforming challenges together in different and exciting ways from area to area, it doesn't so much break the mold as it delivers about the experience you'd expect from platforming with Mario. Puzzles require both understanding and execution. Platforming is literally all about execution. That's not to say there aren't hidden areas for you to find, these are literally called secret areas after all, but finding them isn't so much a puzzle in the majority of circumstances as it is a scavenger hunt. So I'm going somewhere with this, but I need another clip. Quick summary, shrines and secret areas are different because one has waypoints and one doesn't. One has a permanent upgrade, the other has a progress marker. One has puzzles, one has platforming. One helps you get your bearing on the world map, one stays mostly off the beaten path.
Instead of this shrine ending with a free moon for noticing this path, you get an extra challenge that is more difficult than what you've done before. You notice this, and as a reward, you get development on the concept. You earn the second moon. Hopefully some gears are turning right now with what I just said. This is a crucial difference. These notice something moons are an epidemic across the shrine content in Odyssey, which is a shame because all of them could have functioned like this one in the Chain Tromp shrine.
I suppose I should tell you that Anderson hates the capture mechanic. He doesn't enjoy using it, he doesn't think it's particularly clever or interesting, and he doesn't like its overall execution. The capture mechanic is widely regarded as one of the more interesting things Mario has done in the last 10 years, and I'll gush about it later. But the thing is, this whole approach to design wouldn't be enough to satisfy a person like Anderson. Not because he doesn't like captures. Remember, half the secret areas in the game don't really use the capture mechanic at all. He's bothered by what he refers to as copy-pasting. He doesn't like it when he feels content is being reused, so a large part of his argument is dedicated to calling out what he considers to be lazy, hastily developed moon collections that cheapen the overall gameplay experience. If you went to every secret area and put a secret somewhere inside that led to a slightly modified version of the challenge you just did, something that you'd have to do in, what, 80 secret areas? It wouldn't have been heralded as genius game design, it simply would have become another example of how the game's design is copied and pasted over and over again. And remember, shrines and secret areas are different, which means they serve different purposes. The point of a shrine is to get a permanent upgrade, and just off the beaten path in the area, usually through some manipulation of puzzle mechanics, you can get a bonus chest that might have something as rare as armor. Mario Odyssey is following the standard set in the Mario series over the better part of the last 20 years, and it is not an RPG. There are no permanent boosts to get, no story-specific items to collect, no inventory to manage. There's simply a hole in the wall that you probably wouldn't notice unless you were paying close attention, and that is, in fact, the entire challenge. I've never really seen anyone question this in Mario before. It's a staple of the franchise. Saying every secret wall needs to have an extra challenge behind it isn't just a wild thing to ask for in terms of overall implementation because it's unrealistic. It's just not how Mario works. And that's one of the more important things for us to remember. None of the secrets in Mario 64 were particularly clever or complicated. The special cap switches, much like the switch palaces from Super Mario World, were single rooms dedicated to pressing the differently colored switches and then leaving the level. Now, to its credit, Mario 64 has major gameplay elements that felt like you were discovering a secret. Opening the path into Big Boo's haunt, finding out that the volcano and lethal lava land can be jumped into, or discovering the fake wall that leads to the mysterious mountain slide in Tall Tall Mountain are some of the more obvious examples. This is, in part, why I think Anderson believes Super Mario Odyssey's secret areas to be the main component of Odyssey's gameplay. Not only do they possess some of the most complicated bespoke platforming challenges, but they also give that same feeling of discovering a secret that areas in Mario 64 managed to convey. He's wrong, of course, and if you want to find out exactly why he's wrong, you'll have to wait until the end of the gameplay section coming up next. And as a quick aside, I know that there's some people who are going to be upset that I didn't analyze secret areas in full depth. Why didn't you talk about them? I didn't like the secret areas. I didn't think they were fun. They gave me too many easy moons. The challenges were way too easy. You should have spent time talking about them in detail and admitting that they're bad and make the game worse to play. If I had spent time mechanically breaking down the secret areas, just like if I had broken down the shrines from Breath of the Wild in my previous video, it would have added 20,000 words and 3 hours to the script because there's fucking 96 of them. I'm not doing that. A value judgment on the quality of these platforming sections isn't relevant to my argument anyway, and to properly give them the due time and attention they deserve, I would have to go through every jump, every enemy, every cappy throw with a fine-toothed comb. The only people who are allowed to complain about me not doing that video are people who sub to my Patreon, who can then yell at me as much as they want until I decide to make it. So until then, you'll have to settle. So, the gameplay section. What we'll talk about is the overall composition of the game's collection. If some of the stars in the game aren't challenging, does it really affect the overall gameplay experience so drastically that it makes the game unplayable? Gameplay. One of the things Joseph Anderson does is he tries to make the case that the vast majority of stars in Mario Odyssey are baby stars meant for babies to collect, and because they don't provide any kind of serious or unique challenge in the majority of circumstances, they're automatically bad game design. So, of course, because we're supposed to be comparing Odyssey to Mario 64 in this essay, we can ask the same question. Was one of the most lauded N64 games of all time actually full of stars that were unique and challenging, or have people been wearing rose-colored glasses when they look back on a 3D puzzle platforming game from 1996? I sat down and collectively broke down every different star type in every iteration of 3D Mario that's been released since 64, including Sunshine, Galaxy, Galaxy 2, and Odyssey. The results may surprise you. Star categories. There are a total of 43 unique categories of star in Super Mario 64, including the following 11 repeated categories. Stars sitting visibly at the top of the level, cannon stars, boss stars, stars from Koopa the Quick Races, stars from diving through ocean rings, stars from slide races, cap stars, collect the secret stars, red coin stars, 100 coin stars, and secret stars. Out of the 120 stars available, these collectively make up 88 of the stars in the game. The other 32 are unique puzzle or platforming challenges that are not repeated at any point throughout any of the levels featured in the game's content. Now, because all of the post-game content in Super Mario Odyssey is optional, we'll be looking exclusively at what is available to the player in the lead-up to the final boss fight against Bowser. That means there are 177 unique categories of Moon in Super Mario Odyssey available before completing the game, with a total of 463 moons available before the main story is completed. In order to avoid looking biased, I will level with the Odyssey hate stands in the audience. Very few people 100% completed this game, but I would be remiss, and people would complain, if I didn't give you the 100% totals in addition. So there are 249 unique categories of Moon in Super Mario Odyssey available in the entire game, with a total of 836 unique moons available when including the post-game. Because it would take a little too long to go through all of them individually, we'll break them into some further distinct categories: capture moons and non-capture moons. Of the capture moons, there are 22 distinct enemies that you have to capture in order to collect a total of 97 moons. Of the non-capture moons, there are 45 repeating categories that make up a total of 250 moons. And finally, the remaining 116 moons are all unique puzzle or platforming challenges that are not repeated at any point throughout the levels featured before the post-game, bringing us back to our total of 463 moons. If we look at a percentage breakdown of the total number of unique stars in each game compared to its total, here's what it looks like. Super Mario 64, with its 43 unique categories and 120 stars, has a 35.83% ratio. Super Mario Sunshine, with its 28 unique categories and 120 shines, has a 23.36% ratio. Super Mario Galaxy, with 60 unique categories and 120 stars, has a 50% ratio. Super Mario Galaxy 2, with 58 unique categories and 120 stars, has 48.54%. And Super Mario Odyssey, with 177 unique categories and 463 moons, has a 38.22% ratio. Now, whether or not this actually matters is obviously up for debate. Should one of the biggest gaming corporations on the planet, which has literally billions of dollars, be providing roughly the same value of game that they were providing in 1996? That depends entirely on what you mean by value. See, whether or not you're completing an original platforming challenge or puzzle every time you attempt one didn't stop people from labeling Mario 64 as one of the best puzzle platforming games of all time. In fact, if we actually look at the breakdown, we'll find that almost a third of all the game's stars, 23 for red coins and 15 100 coin stars for a total of 38, rely on collecting coins and nothing else. I've never actually seen anyone complain about this, but it represents a staggeringly large amount of the game's content across every single level, including a solid chunk of secret levels you find in the standard course of gameplay. If we look at the Galaxy games, we find that they have a unique completion rate of about 50%, but in order to finish a 100% run, both games actually require you to collect 242 stars, half of which are available only in the post-game as repeats or slightly altered versions of previously featured stars, as with Galaxy 2's green stars, meaning their unique completion rate is only technically around 25%. Until the release of Odyssey, it was pretty widely recognized that Galaxy 2 was one of the best Mario games that had ever been released, and it was wildly more acclaimed than Galaxy by gamers and critics despite selling nearly 40% fewer copies. And honestly, when we want to look at stars more closely in Super Mario 64, we find that there's only 11 repeated categories of stars in the game compared to Super Mario Odyssey's 37. That makes up 88 stars in Mario 64 to Mario Odyssey's 250 moons, which averages out to 8 stars per repeated category and 6.7 moons per repeated category, respectively. Just look at how similar those numbers are. Those numbers being so close together shows that they're really not that different in scope. There's also the fact that despite there being so many more repeat moons in Odyssey, the vast majority of the repeat moons are relatively interesting challenges that couldn't have been done in an N64 game. There's slots and jump rope and scooters and Jaxi, there's scarecrow secrets and 2D levels, and in addition to all this, there's the capture mechanic. Almost every one of the different capture options in the game creates a fun little minigame and puzzle that's designed just for the purpose of the level you find yourself in and the creature you find yourself controlling. And while some people might say that this gimmick is unfun or unoriginal, it really did feel like a breath of fresh air for me when it came to playing a Mario game. That's not to say most of them are complicated. Take over a dinosaur, break some boulders. Take over a zipper, unzip a wall. Take over a Goomba, collect a bunch of Goombas to get a Lady Goomba to fall in love with you. The most complex moons probably come from possessing Glydon in a few different levels, Pokio in Bowser's Castle, and Wiggler in the Poison Swamp. That being said, in the majority of circumstances, the puzzles were designed to be fun and interesting and provide you with the option to interact with the world in different ways. Suddenly, it's not really about whether or not you can see a challenge and understand it. Now it's about how you're going to get a Cheep over to the platforming challenge to solve it, or whether you can find a nearby uproot to stretch yourself to a moon hiding in the cliffside above. The thing is, if, like Anderson, you sat down and said that in order for a Mario game to be considered good, you needed to have a 100% rate of unique, original stars and moons, you would have to label every single installment in the 3D Mario franchise as a bad game that's not worth playing. It's worth pointing out that during Mario Galaxy and Galaxy 2's development, Nintendo was a wildly successful company that was in the middle of selling the Nintendo Wii, one of the most successful home consoles in gaming history, and the Nintendo DS, the most successful handheld in gaming history. As of the time of writing, the Nintendo Switch is still about 15 million units short of outselling the DS. Was Nintendo capable of making a game with 100% unique challenges crafted in a bespoke way for every single puzzle platforming challenge? Probably. And yet they still made the decision to copy-paste certain types of stars across the game, creating a series of challenges that were similar in scope to each other to save on costs and development time, allowing them to push the games out in time for Christmas and boost their overall sales. And that really begs the question, doesn't it? If copy-pasting is so bad that it ruins games, but copy-pasting is a feature of every Mario game, why aren't we allowed to say it's ruining Mario? The obvious answer is that the alternative is to have one really good Mario game every 10 years, or one marginally good one every 3 to 4. Yes, they could have made an extra completely original challenge for every single moon, and it would have added way more than 18 months of development time to the game. I've seen the demographics in my analytics, so I know about 40% of you are in your 30s. If you take the former over the latter, you would have like 4 good Mario games left before you die. I'd be way happier with 12 or 13 good ones instead. So, for better or worse, a corporation made a bunch of business decisions to make money rather than a series of artistic decisions to make the best game imaginable. And yet, despite all this, when they ended up making similar decisions for Mario Odyssey, they developed a game that delivered a very similar quality to what we got with the Galaxy games, only falling short of Galaxy 2 in a small handful of ways while arguably improving on the formula. Maybe I'm a fake fan, maybe I haven't been around in the discourse long enough, but I honestly can't remember any of the other 3D Mario games having to contend with criticisms about having too much copy-pasting. Challenges being repeated through a Mario game also leads us to ask questions about their overall difficulty. Difficulty curve. One of the things that we need to talk about between the two games is their respective difficulty curves. I will offer the most obvious disclaimer: Mario has never been difficult. Personally, as a casual player who's played and beaten every 3D Mario featured in this video, with the exception of Galaxy 2, I have never once had a hard time getting through levels or completing challenges within the game. I understand that my experience may not be everyone's experience, but I'm opening with this because, from what I can tell, this is pretty much the consensus among people who have been playing Mario games for the last 30 years. As difficult as I consider some of the early 2D Mario games to be in terms of wrangling the controls, I've still completed the first 3 games, both Super Mario Worlds, the new Super Mario Bros. Games, and when I say completed, I mean including any secret levels that were present in the games. It's not exactly the same, but early Mario is a lot like the Mega Man series. You'll die in a lot of places if you're just starting the game, but as you play the levels, you'll learn the proper way to avoid taking damage and falling into pits through the repetition of moving forward through places you've done before. So what is the difficulty curve in Super Mario 64? There is a scaling difficulty throughout the game. Bob-omb Battlefield, the first level, is wide open with no bottomless pits and lots of simple enemies. Cool Cool Mountain and Whomp's Fortress are levels surrounded by cliffs with lots of different ways to slide off or jump into oblivion, though they're enemy light. Water levels, like Jolly Roger Bay and Dire Docks, are all contained entirely in the water, but have you swim for extended durations and potentially run out of oxygen. And late levels, like Rainbow Ride and Tick-Tock Clock, are not just vertically challenging, but also include lots of moving parts that could throw you to your death. I'm going to stick to some of the broad strokes here instead of doing a breakdown on a level-by-level basis. Mario 64's difficulty mostly comes from controlling Mario in 3D space. Understanding how to move Mario efficiently without accidentally throwing yourself into enemies or off of a cliff can be challenging for casual players, though it's pretty easy to wrap your head around as you move forward through the game. As mentioned briefly in the controls section, the reality of the situation is that large portions of the game do not require you to use most of your abilities in order to overcome obstacles. By my count, there are only 4 stars where wall kicks or triple jumps are required to collect a star, and a single star where long jumping is necessary. There are only 8 stars in the game that require you to use the B button to grab or punch, and for collecting 5 stars, punching and kicking can be substituted with a ground pound. In addition, ground pounds are required to complete 3 stars in the game total. Diving, slide kicking, crawling, backflips, and reverse somersaults are not necessary to collect any star in the game. This means you could feasibly collect 99 of the game's 120 stars without ever doing more than running around and double jumping. Now granted, the game's platforming gets more complicated as you move towards the later levels, such that playing the whole game without ever kicking a bomb or doing a backward somersault to quickly correct your movement would be inconvenient, to say the least, but it's possible. The reason we're showcasing these requirements is to point out that while the difficulty curve in Mario 64 eventually leads to levels like Rainbow Ride, which is a series of platforms suspended in the sky that are very easy to fall off of, even Rainbow Ride itself has little in the way of special controls requirements in order to complete its challenges. Much like its predecessor, Super Mario Odyssey is built with very similar considerations in mind. 4 of the options that the player has to activate Cappy, the cap jump and the upward, downward, and homing cap throws, are completely unnecessary to complete any challenge in the game. Likewise, there are a total of 164 capture moons between the main storyline and post-game, 3 moons that require using Mario's rolling ability, 13 moons that require using Cappy's circular spin or hold mechanics, 36 moons that require using Cappy to hit objects, 33 moons that require putting Cappy on a scarecrow, and 46 moons that require using the ground pound. That's 295 moons in a game with 836 unique moons to collect, making up 35.28% of the game's total content. Unlike Mario 64, many of the elements listed here are used in the other 541 moons in the game, though they're not the exclusive element used to collect the moon or complete its associated challenge. I'm sure some people might think this doesn't have much to do with the difficulty curve, but it does. Noting that most of the mechanics you use to move Mario throughout each kingdom are only the primary focus of about a third of the game's content showcases how similar its construction and scope is to previous iterations of 3D Mario. Just like FLUDD's rocket nozzle in Super Mario Sunshine, a significant chunk of the game's control elements are only used as a primary feature of a puzzle or challenge in a small handful of places. This isn't a failing of the game's design, but rather an intentional design decision to keep most of the challenges in the game as simple as possible to allow the target demographic, anywhere from ages 7 to 70, to pick up a controller and complete challenges without a full, in-depth understanding of the controls. Here's Anderson talking about that depth and detail.
Odyssey has the best version of this idea. Cappy feels far more natural to use than FLUDD and is more smoothly incorporated into other moves, especially when being fit into the theme of Mario being a character that jumps a lot. There's a combo string of moves that you will learn while playing Odyssey that goes like this: jump, hat throw, dive, bounce off the hat, throw the hat again, repeat dive, and then land. This can be used to gain more distance either vertically or horizontally. It also has a variant that can be used to climb walls that starts with a ground pound into a high jump, then a hat throw, dive, and bounce, then wall kicking and doing it again for more height.
I think this is also a major problem with Anderson's critique. None of this has anything to do with the difficulty curve of the game. A difficulty curve is not about how many special tricks you can do with the controls, it is about the relative challenge of the obstacles in the level and the actions required to complete them. A lot of the challenge in Mario Odyssey is about noticing secrets. Did you see the glowing spot or find your way into a nook or cranny hidden just out of sight? Then you're rewarded with a moon. The challenge was not in completing some kind of specific platforming trick or possessing an enemy, because remember, only about a third of the game's content involves that as its primary function, and another half or so uses it from platform to platform. The challenge was in discovering the secret in the first place. At the risk of sounding repetitive, secrets have been a feature of Mario for a long time, and the relative challenge of secrets in a game like Mario Odyssey is in your ability to pay attention to your surroundings and scour the landscape to exhaust it of its collectibles. And don't get me wrong, Mario Odyssey is a very easy game. Sunshine is the hardest of the 3D Mario games because the FLUDD mechanics take a lot of getting used to, and there are 14 shines in the game where they take FLUDD away from you. The Galaxy games have difficulty that's much more artificial. They put you on lots of platforms with bottomless pits that make it very easy to throw yourself into oblivion, much like in Mario 64, but that's also contrasted with Mario 64's large walkable levels, in which the actual result of failing a significant chunk of platforming challenges is that you land somewhere down below and can walk back up. Galaxy had very few large walkable levels, while Odyssey is designed around this idea almost exclusively. This is why so many moves revolve around timing. A time limit for a scarecrow, or a time limit collecting notes, is often meant as a replacement for the kinds of challenges that featured in previous games, where the consequence for minor mistakes was much more severe. Noting this, a significant chunk of Odyssey's difficult moons lie entirely in its capture mechanic. And while a number of moons involve doing something as simple as breaking open a crate or ground pounding a glowing spot that's hard to miss, the capture moons are where Odyssey mixes its platforming with an emergent mechanic that arguably becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This helps us segue into our next topic: gimmicks. Gimmicks. Let's go ahead and start with what we mentioned earlier. Super Mario 64's gimmick is the camera. This was the first time a Mario game had been represented in 3D, so the point of the game's design was to make the most of the camera controls that allowed you to manipulate your perspective on the game world. Some of the different ways this gimmick was utilized included top of the level stars, in which you can look up and see a star sitting at the top of an area, like a tower or a pyramid. Mario's ability to look at the world using a Z-axis quite literally provided a new angle on level completion, allowing you to feel like you were exploring a level instead of simply completing it. In addition, the camera wasn't limited to restricting your perspective and hiding content around each level. The Bowser levels are designed in such a way that moving the camera to a side angle can make the platforming more straightforward, allowing the player to view the obstacles from a more easily understood direction. For what it's worth, it should be obvious that the reason future Mario games included new gimmicks is because the camera became the standard by which 3D Mario was developed. Super Mario 64 didn't need an additional complicated gameplay mechanic in order to functionally improve Mario's movement through the game world, because the camera was a brand new development that people weren't used to using. As such, when Super Mario Sunshine came out, people were expecting the camera controls to be present, so the inclusion of FLUDD became the game's shocking new twist, its innovative take on allowing Mario to traverse the levels in the game in new and exciting ways. Just like the spin mechanic in Mario Galaxy, the purpose of these gimmicks was to make players think about how Mario moves differently than by simply jumping and diving, often to the point of over-reliance. FLUDD makes it very easy to correct jumps, and spinning makes it very easy to disable enemies and break open objects, so you'll find yourself using them almost constantly over the normal course of gameplay. So now that we know what the gimmick in Mario 64 is, how exactly does the gameplay in Mario Odyssey stack up against Mario 64, and what does it do that's so special? In order to talk about what that is, we have to talk about Cappy. Cappy is what's different about this game from every other 3D Mario release of the previous 20 years. You might think that Cappy is just like FLUDD or that he's no different than the spin mechanic, but in reality he represents everything that's right about modern game design. In my previous video, the conclusion I came to was that the dungeons in Breath of the Wild have an active component that sets it apart from the more passive, static components of dungeons in its Nintendo 64 counterpart. And that's exactly what you have here. Cappy allows you, the player, to become an active participant in the gameplay in a way that didn't really exist in the Mario franchise before Odyssey's release. To put this into context, let's run a little thought experiment. Imagine Cappy wasn't in the game at all. The first time you see a T-Rex, you can't take control of him and use him to bust through walls, you have to lure him into the rocks you want him to break before you can pass through the obstacle. When you arrive in Knuckletech's chamber, you can't take control of his fists when he launches them at you, you have to somehow bait his fists into spinning around and punching him in the head accidentally. When you find Pokios in Bowser's castle, you won't be able to control where they stab the wall, but you'll instead have to wait for them to arrange themselves in a pattern or trick them into that arrangement to let you jump to specific places. Whether we look at Goombas, or Wigglers, or Glydons, or Bullet Bills, the function of the game's puzzles would be similar, but markedly less fun to play. This was the state of things in older Mario games. I can recall at least half a dozen times throughout the Galaxy games where you had to lure a Bullet Bill to a glass chamber to blow it up. You can jump around from platform to platform, but you're inevitably going to run into a roadblock where an enemy or an obstacle forces you to sit patiently and wait. The active component in letting you, the player, take control of these enemies provides you with the ability to shape how the challenges function and play out. You don't have to wait around or run in circles to convince enemies to notice you and then let them take care of things in your place. You can make it happen yourself. You're the one shattering blocks and making a moon appear as a T-Rex. You're not watching Knuckletech hit himself on accident, you're punching him with his own fist and telling him to stop hitting himself. You're the one stabbing the wall and launching yourself in different directions, and you can use that power to launch yourself to places without having to recognize patterns or have the secrets spelled out for you. You build the Goomba stacks, you stretch across poisonous gaps, you fly down the mountains and skyscrapers, you soar horizontally across platforms until you blow up a distant object. That's what the gimmick is. It's a wholly new approach to the platforming design in modern Mario games that not only gives you the capacity to see the Mario world through the eyes of its denizens, but also play a role in changing that world's landscape to suit your needs. Now, granted, this is definitionally a gimmick. What we run into a lot is that people look at this gimmick and say they don't like it and that it doesn't really add anything to the game, but the whole purpose of that hypothetical where we imagine a world without Cappy is meant to show you that the game would be a kind of unremarkable platformer without it. And in reality, when you break down the total number of moons that require you to capture a creature in order to collect them, you get the 97 I mentioned before, adding about 15 multi-moons from the 5 boss fights where it gets used, which amounts to approximately 24.19% of the game's main storyline moons. That's roughly 1 out of every 4 moons is collected with the capture mechanic, which some people will look at and say it's way too much, but I'd look at it and say it's arguably too little. It's a core mechanic that gets used consistently, and even noting that it gets used as often as it does, it still makes up a smaller percentage of moons than the coin collecting stars make up in Super Mario 64. Even when you sit down and compare the challenges directly, what exactly do Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Odyssey not have in common? Remember the controls section? There's 11 new abilities, but there's only 7 more than there were previously, and most of these are just things Mario has been able to do in mainline 3D Mario games for years, like the ground pound jump. Most of the new abilities aren't even required to play the game, sort of the same way that most of the abilities in 64 weren't really required either. I mean, honestly, how often were casual players using slide kicks? Using the spin hold for Cappy on certain glowing objects is the only one that really comes to mind, which gets used to solve a total of 4 moons in the main game and an additional 9 moons in the post-game. The fact of the matter is, outside of the capture moons and the myriad number of minigames provided throughout the course of the game, the majority of the platforming in Odyssey is exactly the same as the platforming from the last 4 3D Mario games. If I had to make a direct comparison, I'd probably analogize it to the secret levels from Sunshine, especially if we directly compare those to the timer challenge moons that are spread throughout Odyssey. Simple, straightforward platforming with an emphasis on running, timed jumps, and accurately orienting your character in 3D space. They even designed them aesthetically to match. Remember, Anderson hates the capture mechanic.
That's the problem, though. The moveset and abilities that replace Mario are never close to interesting or varied. You're a tank that can shoot. You're a fireball that can swim in lava. You're a Goomba that can jump. This comes back to the idea of player options versus the environments and challenges you're put through. This issue of low complexity isn't strictly the fault of the possessions themselves, but rather that Nintendo never did anything worthwhile with them. Even the boss fights that use the possessions are boring until the rematches later. Even then, some of them aren't that engaging.
2 things. 1, when have Mario enemies ever been complicated? You jump on their head and they explode into coins. It makes a lot of sense that Cappy's whole deal wouldn't be about controlling enemies to do insanely complex tasks, or controlling them for more than a short period of time, so their move pool is limited to their one primary characteristic. Hammer Bros and Fire Bros throw their namesake, Charge and Chuck charges, Wigglers wiggle, Pokios poke, Glide on glides. Wait, I'm sensing a theme here. It's almost as if Mario enemies being one-dimensional in a mainline Mario game is a feature, not a bug. And 2, please, be honest. Were you really expecting them to develop a wholly diverse and explicit moveset for as many as 27 different creatures in the game? Genuinely, this is insane. Forget what I had to say about development time. This is so needlessly complex that I don't understand how it functions as a game design critique. What you are asking for is called a role-playing game. What you are asking for has classes, the things that determine a character's abilities, that are different from character to character. The thing about classes is that they're all standardized in such a way that there's a significant amount of overlap. As a result, programming separate classes is usually relatively easy depending on the structure of your game. In past exploration of JRPG mechanics, especially in the 2D space, you wouldn't need incredibly complicated designs for 3D movement and functions, you would just need additional particle effects and animations for every new ability you gave to the character. I'm not even certain what you could want added to the characters here. What do you think a Goomba does? It walks around and maybe jumps once or twice until someone squishes it. I guess it could have like a headbutt, but its overall jumping capabilities were kept low because 1, it's a Goomba, and 2, they made Goomba stacking a thing. And as a matter of fact, there is a game where you can play where Goombas have a more diverse moveset that lets you explore abilities that Goomba didn't have in previous Mario installments. It's even an RPG. I think this is my favorite complaint about the capture mechanic. If they could just have made the capture mechanic completely super in-depth like in an RPG, and let me I don't know, use it to do something more interesting inside a secret area than collect a moon, like maybe fight other Mario enemies or something. They should drop something important too, something that's not a moon or purple coins. What's that? Having more than 3 types of currency in a game that's not an RPG gets super confusing super quickly. Mario RPG doesn't even have that many currencies. I mean, they could just add... They don't make Mario RPGs anymore, they only make Mario and Luigi games. Well. Nevertheless. To reiterate, the capture mechanic is not special because of its depth, it is special because of its function. Active participation in changing the landscape of the world Mario traverses was previously limited to power-ups, which meant that if you hadn't found the red switch, blue switch, and green switch in Mario 64, you were completely out of luck in attempting to collect 6 of the stars in the game. It's not a lot, but for kids playing the game religiously without a player's guide, they sat tantalizingly out of reach until they figured out how to find the associated power-up and collect the star. I actually watched Game Grumps play through Mario 64 a few weeks back. It was one of their earliest Let's Plays. They were so completely stumped by the underwater cavern in Wet Dry World. Not just on how to get there in the first place, but also on how to collect all 8 red coins and the star inside the cage. The reason they were stumped wasn't just because they couldn't use a power-up, it was because the direct mechanics represented in the game world, the lowering and rising of water levels, didn't allow for active movement throughout the level. There's the level before you lower the water and the level after. The two don't interact, they're static states imposed as a before and after event meant to wall your progress. And even after grabbing the invisibility cap, you're still Mario. All the cap does is let you move through one chain link fence and nothing else. Mario still does all his regular movement, his regular jumps, his regular controls. Possessing an uproot in Odyssey lets you stretch to heights you couldn't have stretched to before. It lets you break nuts on ledges that were unreachable, as well as hit blocks or other objects, including the Steam Gardens boss up at great heights. And you might think, well, isn't there a before and after state when you possess the uproot? Yes, but there's a pretty enormous difference between passing an obstacle and changing it. Direct manipulation of the obstacles in front of you will always be more satisfying than a level mechanic that only changes when certain conditions are met. It's why some of the best levels in Mario Odyssey are those ones with the red and blue platforms that flip when you spin. By the time you get here, you'll be used to using the spin mechanic being your main way of correcting your jumps in any given direction, which is what makes this section so challenging. If you spin to correct your jump, you might flip the wrong platforms and fall, so you have to pay attention to when and where you're jumping to avoid the obstacles that fall along the path. The problem here comes from the fact that while you're directly manipulating the game world states with your own controls, the game is using the fact that it's trained you to over-rely on the spin mechanic by changing its primary use for the duration of the level. This means that it's very difficult to consciously manipulate states unless you're very attentive, and most casual players have a hard time making the sudden adjustment. Though it lacks the manipulation mechanics, the secret levels in Sunshine operate on the same idea. The game trains you to use FLUDD to correct your jumps, then takes it away, forcing you to rely on the game's basic platforming without the gimmick's assistance. But the capture mechanic doesn't follow this metric. While it does get you hooked on its usage as a function of its gameplay, it doesn't actually provide Mario with any kind of direct boost to his platforming controls, instead opting to completely change Mario's moveset to something simple when you control an enemy. There are some obvious points of order. You have to use a Pokio to traverse most of Bowser's Castle, a Lava Bubble to traverse most of Mount Volbono, and a Cheep Cheep to comfortably swim through Lake Lamode or Bub Lane. These represent alternatives to Mario's basic moveset that allow him to use specialty skills for a short period of time. Some people might think that the real gimmick here is Cappy's non-capture abilities, but as mentioned in the difficulty curve section, there are 295 moons that can be collected through a series of mechanics, while everything else is optional. If we break that down to Cappy exclusively, his abilities are required to collect about 246 moons. Granted, even noting this, Cappy is still a fundamental part of this game, even for casual players who don't regularly run around cap diving. You're obviously encouraged to use Cappy to break open boxes and defeat enemies on a regular basis, but there's no tricks. They don't wait until you've gotten complacent, giving you the bait and switch because every capture moon already changes the level design from standard by-the-book platforming by a significant margin, often opting to replace it with a tailored capture-based challenge. This is a brief aside, but it's a little important for later. A critique I have seen in the course of gameplay is that multiple levels in Mario 64 get unlocked all at the same time, allowing you to complete a variety of challenges at your leisure, while levels are unlocked sequentially in Mario Odyssey. That means if you play through a section of Mario Odyssey and find that you're not really enjoying the thematic approach to that kingdom, you don't really have any options available to you, and you're stuck playing through it until you've completed enough of the level to move on. In Mario 64, you can just complete however much of the level you feel like completing, then go complete a different level if you feel that you like that one better. I'll post some really simple mathematics. In order to complete Mario 64, you have to collect 70 of the power stars to unlock Bowser in the Sky, which represents approximately 58.82% of the 119 stars available before that level. There are some collection gates throughout the castle. You need at least 8 stars to access the first Bowser level, 30 stars to access the second, and 50 to access the top floor, where the final 2 levels are located. Most of the game's content is handed to you 3 or 4 levels at a time. Odyssey is a little different in that there's a minimum completion amount required to get through every level, always some number fewer than 20 moons, that collectively adds up to 124 moons to reach the final boss fight. This represents 26.78% of the game's available content before the post-game, which is in part why the speedrun for Odyssey clocks in underneath 57 minutes of gameplay. I don't really have anything to say about this critique. This pretty much boils down to preference almost exclusively, but I also feel the need to point out that I've never actually seen anyone criticize Galaxy and Galaxy 2 for walling you behind completing stars and galaxies you might not like before allowing you to progress, so I think this is kind of a weird nitpick. There's a really specific complaint that Anderson uses to structure his video, which involves talking at length about the difficulty curve of the game and the stars, not moons, that are available to you when you first arrive in the Mushroom Kingdom. He explains this problem at length, showcasing how every star is incredibly easy to get, and by extension bad, and then does his reveal, after like 15 minutes of ranting, to say that the Mushroom Kingdom and Peach's Castle is actually the last level you unlock in the course of the game. There's just one problem. You don't have to stay and complete any of these stars because none of them are available until the post-game. It's a completely optional level. Granted, they did put a lot of moons in this level, which raises the question, did they design this first and then make the late decision to turn it into post-game content? Or did they design this last, hoping that the ease of difficulty would be a welcome addition to a familiar favorite? Still, it's really weird to have the complaint that Mario games were all about freedom of choice, and then when you're given the freedom not to complete something, you immediately find something to hate about it. And remember, we're going to reference this section later, so keep this timestamp under wraps. Wait times in 3D Mario.
In Odyssey, these interruptions happen constantly since you're given moons for just about everything. Later on, you're even given moons for getting moons. Yes, you heard that correctly. These moons that are all over the place take you out of the flow of gameplay. 3D World had them too and did not stop the game for a celebration jingle when you picked them up. It only did that at the flagpole at the end of every level. You are free to keep moving and not lose whatever flow of movement or momentum you are currently in. Another way of looking at this is that the celebrations you get in Odyssey for beating bosses or for reaching the end of a challenge room never bothered me. It was the hundreds and hundreds of filler moon celebrations that bogged everything down. There's one partway through a challenge room that interrupts gameplay so severely that it has to remove your speed boost flower power up and make you pick up another one after it's over in order to continue the level.
I kept watching this section over and over again. I kept asking myself why I was so bothered by this argument. Honestly, why did I care so much? If he was that bothered by a 4-second cutscene, shouldn't I just let him be pithy and move on to the next point? I spent hours racking my brain trying to understand what it was that made me so frustrated and upset. And then it hit me. Being mad about the 4-second cutscene when you collect a moon makes no sense, because that's been a staple of the 3D Mario franchise since its inception. Think about it. How many times have you collected a star in a 3D Mario game without there being an unskippable cutscene showing you collecting the star? Exactly! You've never seen it because it doesn't exist! Super Mario Odyssey's design is exactly the same as all the other games where this happens. In Mario 64, for 85 of the collectible stars in the game, a cutscene plays when you've accomplished whatever your primary goal is. Defeating a boss, collecting enough coins, finding all the secrets, and then the star spawns as a result of your actions. This starts a 4-second unskippable cutscene where you watch the star appear in whatever part of the map you're supposed to head towards to collect it. This is exactly the same as it is in Mario Odyssey. You complete some action, whether defeating a specific enemy or flipping a switch or completing a puzzle, and the game pauses to show a moon spawning somewhere nearby. Then you head towards it and collect it, and thus does Anderson's personal inescapable purgatory begin. The thing is, this used to be a lot worse. I sat down and averaged out the star spawn durations from all the 3D Mario games, and this was the result. Super Mario 64 has a spawn time of 4 and a collection time of 10. Super Mario Sunshine has a spawn time of 8 and a collection time of 17. Super Mario Galaxy has a spawn time of 5 and a collection time of 19. Super Mario Galaxy 2 has a spawn time of 5 and a collection time of 31. And Super Mario Odyssey has a spawn time of 4 and a collection time of 4. Note, as far as I could tell in Galaxy and Galaxy 2, there were only a small handful of stars, in the ballpark of around 10, that had no spawning cutscene, but I didn't dive into this explicitly because it would have taken a lot of extra time and we're not really talking about Galaxy. You might be wondering what that second row called collection time was. The reality of the situation is that Anderson is only complaining about half the issue. First, there is spawn time, where an unskippable 4 to 5 second cutscene occurs where Mario cannot be controlled and the camera whisks you away to the star spawning location. And then there is collection time, which is the duration of time between when you touch the star and when you can control Mario again. The numbers listed are rounded to the nearest second and collected from tool-assisted speedruns, which means the associated playthroughs used frame-perfect inputs to skip past any skippable sections, like the introductory cutscenes in Sunshine or the Save Your Game prompt in Galaxy, as fast as mechanically possible. An average human holding the controller is likely to be unable to skip these sections with any consistency, meaning you'll add at least a few seconds to your playtime every other time you collect a star. You might be wondering what the hell is going on with Galaxy 2's collection time. Basically, every time you collect a star, it opens up a new galaxy, but when it doesn't, the average drops from like 31 seconds down to like 22. Either way, that's a hell of a lot of time to be stuck waiting for the game to let you control Mario again, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone complain about it. So of all the 3D Mario games in the entire franchise, Super Mario Odyssey not only has the lowest average collection time, but ties with Super Mario 64 for the shortest spawn time duration on stars. And this is still somehow not satisfactory for millions of people who seem to be nodding their heads to Anderson's cutscene argument more effusively than a drinking bird toy. But hey, maybe you're not totally convinced. 4 seconds is a long time to wait, and it really adds up because there's way more than 120 moons in Mario Odyssey. So let's break it down. Assuming those spawn and collection times for most, if not all, of the stars in each game, what's the total amount of time you can expect to sit around waiting if you collect everything the game has to offer? Wait times. Super Mario 64 has approximately 25 minutes and 40 seconds worth of wait times. Super Mario Sunshine has approximately 52 minutes and 2 seconds. Super Mario Galaxy has approximately 47 minutes and 10 seconds. Super Mario Galaxy 2 has approximately 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 10 seconds. And Super Mario Odyssey has approximately 1 hour, 51 minutes, and 28 seconds. To put this in perspective, the 100% speedruns for each subsequent release in the series increased in time as the years went by because the amount of ancillary menu content and waiting they throw at the player increased with every new iteration of the series. Super Mario 64 speedrun is around 95 minutes, but Sunshine's speedrun comes in just under 3 hours. Galaxy and Galaxy 2 both run about 5.5, and their 242 star completions take just under 11 and 8.5 hours respectively. Finally, Mario Odyssey, the game with 3.5 times as many moons as there are stars and green stars in the Galaxy games, has its 100% speedrun clock in 10 minutes faster than Galaxy 2. Mario Odyssey has the lowest ratio of time spent waiting to actual time spent doing other things in the run, obviously not including any associated boss or story cutscenes. To make matters worse, the times listed in the previous wait time section for the Galaxy games assumes 120 stars, not 242. So we can almost exactly double their average wait times to get a more accurate picture for how long a runner will be waiting around during a 100% run of either game. There are some important considerations to make about speedrun length. Galaxy and Galaxy 2 had lots of levels where you were expected to traverse sections of a level you had already collected stars from by landing at a starting point and making your way towards the content you wanted to complete. Not only does Odyssey do away with this entirely by no longer shunting you out of the level every time you collect moons, it does so occasionally for story-related reasons, but the overall amount of menuing involved as a feature of post-collection is significantly reduced, and you can fast travel to checkpoints you've collected throughout levels to cut down on wandering through previous level sections. And I know what you might be thinking. Well, I'm not a speedrunner, so it's only a 20-hour game for a casual, and I'm expected to spend an hour and 40 minutes waiting around? Yeah, I've got this argument covered too. I averaged out each game's casual 100% runtime by using long plays on the internet. Super Mario 64 takes about 3 hours and 45 minutes to complete, which means you spend about 11% of your time waiting around. Super Mario Sunshine has about a 10-hour runtime, which means you spend around 8 to 9% of your time waiting around. Galaxy and Galaxy 2 both clock in around 16 hours, which means you spend 9 to 10% or 13.5% of your time waiting around. And finally, for Super Mario Odyssey, a game that takes approximately 21 hours for a casual player to complete, you spend about 7.75% of that time waiting around for star collection. And the thing is, while there are lots of players who aren't very good at long plays, these players are typically better than casual players when it comes to providing this type of content. I may have watched a Breath of the Wild long player spend 35 minutes trying to kill a stone talus with remote bombs, but the statement obviously stands. A game filled to the brim with secrets is going to involve hours of wandering around looking for secrets unless you follow a guide. There's 7 times as many moons in Odyssey. I bet you think that's a good number, but there's 7 times as many moons. The wait time still shouldn't be that long. Okay, bet. Let's multiply everything by 7. Wait times multiplied by 7. Super Mario 64 would have 3 hours of time waiting around, Super Mario Sunshine would have just over 6, Super Mario Galaxy would have 5.5, and Mario Galaxy 2 would have 7.5. If there were 7 times as much collectible content in each one of these games and the relative difficulty and time to complete those stars remained consistent, the shortest wait time would still be almost twice as long as Mario Odyssey's hour and 37 minutes. Galaxy 2 would be more than 4 times longer. These wait times are way worse in these games than they are in Odyssey. Well, sure, but the wait times in Odyssey are still literally longer. It's literally the longest out of any of the Mario games, so you're wrong. Proportion doesn't matter. You're just coping and seething. This is one of those arguments that I'm not sure how to respond to. It has by definition the shortest wait time for star spawning and collection that has ever been in 3D Mario, and yes, it could technically have been made shorter if they added an option to skip past a couple of these seconds by pressing the A button. Is not being able to save 2 seconds every time you collect a moon by furiously mashing the A button on your controller a deal breaker for you on a game? Or is it just one complaint on a very long list of complaints that you're using as evidence the game is bad? It's obviously the latter for Anderson, which is why it's such a problem. The reason he's mad is not actually because moons themselves take too long to get, because they take less time to get than they have at any point since Super Mario 64. His problem is that moons in general have a variety of problems that need fixing, so even the little stuff that looks like it might be a problem sets him off. Suddenly, the pithy complaints matter, where, well, sure, he might be making a mountain out of a molehill, but he's right to do so. I mean, just look at how bad all the moons are. It's fine to do that when you hate a game. It's not fine to do that when you're claiming legitimate scholarship in a video essay. This is not a valid point. Be reasonable. And that helps us transition to our next point. Importance.
In the previous games, some of these challenges would have just been for red coins that you need to total up to 8 to get a moon instead of just giving you a moon right at the start. You can see one in the first Bowser level in Mario 64 when you hit this switch and run back and get something in time before it despawns, and you just get a red coin, not a whole moon or star or whatever it would have been. It's a shame that many of these moons couldn't have used the theme in a way to make them more acceptable. It's right there really staring us all in the face. quarter moons, half moons, 3/4 moons. Challenges could have been weighed and given pieces of full moons that only trigger the animation after a certain amount. It wouldn't slow anything down. Some challenges would be worth way more than others. But instead, jumping across these blocks and then back again is apparently worth the same as some of the longest shrines in the game, and deserves just as much celebration. Just imagine for a moment if all the shrines in Breath of the Wild rewarded you with a single Korok seed at the end. Imagine that and you'll understand one of the biggest problems that Odyssey has.
At one point in the video, Anderson specifically goes out of his way to compare moons to Korok seeds, insisting that if you replace the dungeon reward for shrines in Breath of the Wild with seeds, you'd see exactly what the problem is with Odyssey's moons. I think this is an unfair comparison for two reasons. One, if you know what you're doing, a lot of shrines in Breath of the Wild can be solved in 90 seconds or less. That's not a lot of bang for your buck in terms of overall gameplay. Yes, a casual player is probably going to spend a lot more time sitting and trying to figure out the puzzle, but despite their bespoke construction and relative level of complexity when compared to the platforming challenges in Odyssey, you're not getting a full 30-minute delving experience every time you jump in, you're usually just getting one or two puzzles. Why exactly should the reward for those dungeons that short and that simple be a permanent power-up? Is it true? Are moons really as bad as Korok seeds? And are you being rewarded in a way that not only cheapens rewards but provides an unfulfilling experience? Ultimately, this boils down to two really important concepts. I'm going to talk about the first one at length, which is the difference between main and side content. Almost everything in Odyssey is side content. Literally, almost everything. Almost nothing is main content outside of the story missions, bosses, and level completions themselves. Like we mentioned earlier, you can beat the game with 124 out of the 836 unique moons in the game, only 463 of which are available before the post-game. But what exactly separates the two types of content? Anderson brings up the note collection game in Galaxy as his perfect example. Collecting notes used to be side content that you could find off the beaten path, allowing you to collect 1-ups in exchange for spending a little time running in the circle they showed you before getting back to the main storyline. Then he juxtaposes it with Odyssey, where taking notes is a moon subtype that, according to his count, gets used 26 times, only 12 of which are available before the post-game.
Those musical note challenges for 1-ups, in Odyssey, those are moons, mainline content. They're a fun thing to do on the side, but when they make you pause and do a jingle, and apparently also took up so much development time that there's barely any real content in the game after this, it makes me hate them. Should we play our guessing game again for musical note moons? Let's drop it actually, 26. There are 26 collect musical notes challenges in the game, which are as big of a waste of time as you might expect, and that's not including those inside challenge rooms. For those timing challenges, whether you lose your hat or flip a switch, you're looking at 36 moons. I can't think of a single one of these that was interesting. Sometimes they spawn tight jumping shapes and act as something like a tutorial, but they remain at that level for the whole game. At best, they're the blue coin timing stuff from Sunshine. That's at best. At worst, they're a room with a single Koopa Troopa to jump on, or stuff like this.
Taking notes is great for the purposes of this argument because it's used about once per level on average, and there's usually over 30 moons in a typical level, so it's not really the end of the world. The thing is, what separates these two types of content is and always has been the parameters used in its gameplay configuration, not the reward you receive for doing it. Let's put that another way. No one completes a dungeon in Zelda and defeats a boss and thinks, well, clearly that was a boss because I got a heart container and a MacGuffin for defeating it. They think it's a boss because there's a big cinematic buildup. There are camera angles and dialogue that let you know who's doing what and how characters feel about each other. There's a push and pull, a song and dance routine that you go through as a matter of course. Everyone already agrees on this. If you got rewarded with some rupees for defeating an enormous Deku Baba, you'd probably feel like you had just gotten cheated out of a good reward. But that reward isn't what defined it as a boss fight. The overall scope and parameters of the challenge, which force you to rise to the occasion, are what defined the circumstances. Think about the jump rope challenge or the RC car challenge in New Donk City. Think about the beach volleyball in Bub Lane. These are pretty definitively minigames. No one would look at this and say it's main content just because you get a moon for doing it. They would agree that it's defined as a minigame because there's a set criteria. Don't let the rope hit you, don't slow your car down, don't let the ball hit the ground. That defines it against the criteria for success outside of the minigame itself. This isn't all that different from a boss fight, which can define itself using similar standards to normal gameplay. Don't take damage, don't lose all your health, deal enough damage to defeat the enemy in front of you, and you can move forward. That doesn't mean boss fights and minigames are the same thing. I'm not trying to be reductive, but they do both manage to be contained experiences within the game that are separated from standard gameplay by some provided means. So when he loudly declares, "See, taking notes is main content now," no, it isn't. Almost everything in the game is side content, and a certain amount of that side content is required to complete the game. No, hold on. Any side content that's required to complete the game is by definition main content. You're getting so close to getting it, so let me spell it out for you. You have options. Remember when I mentioned the availability of levels in Super Mario 64 and said I didn't really have an opinion on it? That boiled down to personal preference. Maybe you didn't like Jolly Roger Bay, so you decide you're going to collect all the stars in Cool Mountain instead. Maybe you weren't really vibing with Shifting Sandlands, so you decide to exhaust all the stars in Lethal Lava Land. Maybe you know where all the secret stars are, so you use those to circumvent having to complete as many stars and levels you unlock. As long as you collect 70 of the first 119 stars, you're able to complete the game. That number drops to 43 for Sunshine, 60 for Galaxy, and rises back up to 70 for Galaxy 2. If we look at the total amount of main content you need to complete each game as a percentage of its total content, the breakdown looks like this. For Super Mario 64, you need to collect about 58%. For Super Mario Sunshine, you need to collect just around 36. For Super Mario Galaxy, you need to collect about 25 or 50 if you're completing just the first half of the game. For Super Mario Galaxy 2, you need to collect about 28 or 29 or 58% if you're completing all the green stars. And for Super Mario Odyssey, you need to collect just around 14.83% of all of the content in the entire game in order to complete it. As you can see, compared to the overall amount of content featured in the game, Super Mario Odyssey has the lowest amount of content required for completion compared to its total, which should be obvious by now. The main point here, there is an enormous difference between a casual player who plays the game to completion and a power gamer who plays a game to completion. They effectively have two different definitions. In the first instance, the player is only likely to complete whatever content is required to quote-unquote beat the game and get the final cutscene, the end credits, and the post-game unlocks. The power gamer is the one who's going to 100% complete the game, and they're not representative of the average gaming public. In fact, every person I spoke to who owns a copy of Mario Odyssey didn't even touch Rabbit Ridge. Well, it's not enough to be able to walk away from bad content. That content shouldn't be in the game. It's too easy to complete, and it makes me feel like I'm wasting my time. I have to turn something into main content, don't I? Well, I can actually respond to that complaint by getting into my second point. Yeah, all of this was the first half of the explanation. There's this Game Shark code you can use in Super Mario 64 called Nonstop, where you collect a star on a level, you don't activate the cutscene that shows Mario collecting the star, and then zoom out and exit. Instead, you just keep playing through the level, and you can leave by pressing start and selecting exit level. So you can feasibly collect all the available stars in every level you play, assuming they don't have associated story actions or specific level features that are only present based on which star you choose when you enter. You can collect all but one of the stars in Bob-omb's Battlefield, Whomp's Fortress, Cool Mountain, and so on, and when you consider what this means at a basic level, this is pretty fundamentally what happens in Mario Odyssey. The logical conclusion of Super Mario 64's design is simple. What if we just took those levels and made them bigger? Well, there would be a few dozen stars scattered around instead of just 7, right? And the thing is, if you walk around a level in Super Mario 64, you can collect every star in a matter of minutes. And I mean this as someone playing the game casually, even without foreknowledge of the locations of stars in the game. If you were given access to the wing cap, you'd be able to collect 6 out of 7 stars in Bob-omb Battlefield in probably 15 to 20 minutes. The levels just aren't that big, and there aren't enough places to hide stars to make it easy to run around for a full hour. Judging by the casual long play times I collected earlier, the average player probably won't pick up Mario 64 for longer than 4 to 6 hours anyway, and they'll likely only pick up around 100 stars. By comparison, levels in Super Mario Odyssey are enormous. Some of them don't just take 10 full minutes to walk a full circuit around, but they're filled to the brim with odds and ends and secrets that allow you to collect moons everywhere you go. The core gameplay loop is exactly the same as it is in Mario 64. Do platforming challenges, complete little puzzles, and get rewarded with a moon that adds to your collection and eventually unlocks your ability to visit new areas where you rinse and repeat. In addition, the old style of gameplay from 2D games like Super Mario World is present. Now levels are teeming with secrets for you to uncover, and some of them are ludicrously well hidden. Seriously, those rock-kicking moons were evil. I am genuinely of the opinion that these people would hate Super Mario 64, and that they would hate a game like Super Mario 64 if it came out today, because that's what Super Mario Odyssey is, and they hate it. Oh, come on now, that's not fair. I'm just saying I want better designed content that's harder to complete and doesn't reward me for doing so little. Super Mario 64, Course 7, Lethal Lava Land, Mission 3, 8-coin puzzle with 15 pieces. You run in one small circle on top of a slowly moving slide puzzle to collect 8 coins, and the star appears next to you. The funny thing is that based on the way the game is designed, even if the puzzle moves and you happen to fall into the lava and take 2 damage, you'll be bounced back onto the puzzle to collect a coin which heals you for 2 damage. The amount of time it takes for you to walk to this challenge is longer than it takes to complete it. But that was 1996. Game designers didn't know any better. Then you're admitting that a tech demo and a legendary example of game design are 2 different things. Pick a lane. Let's be real for a second, okay? Mario 64 has multiple levels where the actual challenge is climb up to the highest spot in the level and you get a star. Sunshine literally hands you 24 whole shines for collecting 240 blue coins. Galaxy and Galaxy 2 both have levels where the entire challenge is collect 100 purple coins in one straight line while Shadow Marios chase you and a star appears. It was never about designing content well. It was never about difficulty. It was never about whether or not the challenges were original until Odyssey came along. They made the levels bigger, just like they did in the Galaxy games, and everyone was on board. They made a bunch of challenges that could be used multiple times in the same game, just like they did in the Galaxy games, and everyone was on board. But then they kept the relative difficulty that you experience in every other 3D Mario game, and suddenly the haters clutched their pearls. Why am I getting so many rewards? Why aren't things more challenging? Where are the bespoke platforming challenges instead of these incredibly simple, straightforward puzzles? I feel like the game's just throwing moons at me. Why is everything a Korok seed? Korok seeds are bad. No, dumbass. The Korok seeds weren't bad. Everyone does the Korok seeds casually because you have to. No one complains about doing the Korok seeds in the moment. No one is sitting around doing some archery challenge on the world map and going, God, fuck Korok seeds, they're the worst fucking thing in the world, I hate this shit so much. What they're doing instead is seeing the harder seeds and going, oh, I have to carry a rock from like 10 kilometers away to finish this ring. That juice ain't worth the squeeze. Then they walk away. When an easy bow challenge comes along or they notice an acorn, they do that one instead. It's not main content, it's side content. But you need an amount of Korok seeds to fill your inventory as a quality of life feature. So whenever one comes along, you do a calculation in your head. Is this Korok seed enjoyable enough and easy enough that I'd be willing to take time out of my busy schedule to complete it? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. That's exactly the same as Mario Odyssey. Your busy schedule involves going and rescuing the princess. Everything else is a detour. If that detour doesn't involve you doing something fun and getting paid, what's the use in the detour? Right, but who wants to play a game where all you do is collect Korok seeds? You do, motherfucker! You bought a Mario game! If you actually cared this much about the relative importance of stars in Mario, you would not be playing Mario. Genuinely, I cannot remember a time where anyone has complained about secret stars being tied to Toad or Luigi just hanging out in an area. You talk to them and they straight up go, oh, you want a star, Mario? Sure thing, here's your whole ass star. This idea that stars were some sacred, super important MacGuffin that could only be collected through perseverance, grit, and determination has never been true. It reeks of the same pithy bullshit people made up about Breath of the Wild. Oh, treasure used to mean something, man. That 8-second cutscene in Ocarina where the inside of the chest was glowing and you had no idea where you were gonna get, that was the most special thing in the world and they just ruined it, man. They took it away, now it's not special anymore. They used that cutscene for compasses and dungeon maps, you dense pieces of shit. That means there are 22 cutscenes in Ocarina where you collect items that aren't special at all. The chest in the graveyard with a Hylian shield in it doesn't even have that cutscene. It's in a normal chest. That's 176 seconds of your life wasted. Where's the outrage, the moral indignation, the belief that they were making it look like you were collecting deeply important items when you were collecting things that made very little difference for the average player? But it wasn't obvious what I was going to get, so it was still a surprise. Really, it wasn't obvious. You thought the chest surrounded by a ring of fire at the top of a spiral staircase was going to give you the dungeon map instead of a hammer. You thought the chest after defeating Dark Link was about to give you a compass. And don't even say you thought it could be a boss key. All 6 of the boss keys in the game come in their own specially marked chests. So after you've collected one, you know what all the others are going to be. And like we mentioned earlier, the fundamental difference between a game like Galaxy or Galaxy 2 and Odyssey is that in the Galaxy games, sometimes when you would start a star like those 100 purple coin missions, you would have to go through parts of the level you had already seen before and completed in order to reach the section where the new content was located. That's not some huge defining piece of the game that proves those stars are harder and more complicated than Odyssey's. That's busy work. You know that's busy work. It's not particularly fun busy work, so I'm not entirely sure why anyone would defend it, but I know there's plenty of people who think it makes it a better game. Those people are morons. No one liked that busy work before. You would only like it now in a desperate attempt to prove something. To give a quick primer on what we just discussed, outside of some specific categories like boss fights and story cutscenes, there's not really any such thing as main and side content in this series. There's only content. And that content's reward system was established both in overall difficulty and scope 20 years before Odyssey hit the ground running. So really quickly, what does all of this mean? With some obvious exceptions, e.g. Sunshine, Super Mario Odyssey has roughly the same difficulty as previous iterations in the Super Mario franchise's 3D releases. For the most part, the difficulty isn't actually changed all that much, though there are obviously more easy stars than there used to be, mostly by volume of its total. Super Mario Odyssey has roughly the same amount of bespoke content as its predecessors, managing to be proportionally equivalent to a game like Super Mario 64, the same way Sunshine, Galaxy, and Galaxy 2 were. Though Odyssey has the longest wait time for stars of any game in the series by total time, it has the shortest individual wait times for spawning and collecting stars of any game released in the Super Mario series since Super Mario 64, meaning that its proportional wait time is also the shortest. The rewards received for doing content in this game are equivalent to what they were in Super Mario 64 in that you complete a challenge and receive a star. Secrets and platforming challenges, regardless of difficulty, provide the same rewards. Now remind me again, what do you hate about Super Mario Odyssey? Oh, it's way too easy. There's way too many repeat moons. You spend too long having to sit around and wait for moons when you collect them, and they give you rewards that are as meaningless as Korok seeds. Go ahead, man. Call yourself a Mario fan. Because if that's your critique of Mario Odyssey and it's not your criticism of the other 4 3D Super Mario games, you're not making a legitimate analysis, you're refusing to acknowledge reality. Bury your head in the sand, you goddamn gamer ostrich. I know all your little tricks. Now granted, the obvious point of order is that Super Mario 64 can be forgiven for most of these alleged mistakes, if you can call them that. It was one of the earliest 3D platformers ever released, so its relative difficulty, the amount of original stars compared to the overall number of stars, its wait times, and the importance of its challenge to reward ratio can be mostly given a pass. Many of these problems were not fixed in the following 3 installments of the franchise. All these things are arguably better in Mario Odyssey, but they're far from perfect. They're marginal upgrades. When you break them down to their bare essentials and make a reductive argument that applies to the scope of these things in both games, you find that there are nearly as many similarities as there are differences. And if you sat down and played Mario Odyssey and your response was, well, this multi-billion-dollar corporation managed to deliver about the same experience we got from the other games, but I wish it had delivered a little better considering the hype and the overall capabilities of the company, you would be making a 100% valid complaint about the entire Mario series. That is totally fair and accurate. They could have delivered something better than what they did, and no one attempting legitimate scholarship is saying they couldn't or that this was the absolute best they could have done given the circumstances. The problem is that when you attempt to define what it is they delivered poorly, most of your complaints would also have to be used against other Mario games. And the majority of the people falling into this criticism seem to believe that they're exclusively criticizing Odyssey for something Odyssey did uniquely. That is simply not the case. Odyssey is not uniquely bad, Super Mario is uniquely bad. And I am really sorry I have to be the person to reveal this to you, but as it would turn out, a significant chunk of Mario's staying power is the brand and the merchandise, not the video games themselves. Though, admittedly, with 28 million copies of Odyssey sold, the video games themselves do gangbusters. And this is an important part of the critique. Anderson knows he's being pithy. There's no fucking way he doesn't know what he's doing because he brings up the other Mario games and multiple different points that I've made throughout this video before immediately discarding them as unimportant, despite them serving as evidence that directly counters his arguments. Anderson acknowledges that Odyssey is Mario 64's spiritual successor. He acknowledges that star wait times are a feature of the Mario series. He acknowledges that most moons are optional. He acknowledges that the gimmicks in previous Mario games were not used to the fullest of their ability. He acknowledges that the overall difficulty of Mario has never been in question. Hell, he even knows about throwing the moon rock off the dragon's head and still complains about it like it's a valid criticism. And if he says all these things in his video, you'd think that would invalidate my critique, yet here he is, skipping right past every one of those acknowledgments to go on and complain about these exact same things in Odyssey anyway throughout the 2-hour video. He repeatedly says he doesn't want to be unfair to Odyssey only to immediately double down on hating it. He claims objectivity and data and measurements without directly providing the actual data. This was 2 entire hours of him griping about the entirety of the Mario series, and nearly 4 million people watched it like it qualified as legitimate critique. And I guess when it boils down to it, Super Mario Odyssey, it's no masterpiece, is no masterpiece. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, so much. It means so much to me. Thank you. You're all too kind. You're all too kind, really. You're too kind. I'm going to use a clip here to finish off my conclusion.
I think this minigame is terrible, and yet I found myself enjoying it. I didn't know you had to come back after beating the game to unlock the second moon for the better time, so I was here for a while learning how this car controlled. I ended up enjoying it, probably a guilty pleasure, and I should be ashamed of myself.
I think this minigame is terrible, and yet I found myself enjoying it. Why? Why is it terrible? It seems fine. Why should you be ashamed of yourself because it was a guilty pleasure? This feels like CinemaSins garbage all over again. You can't even enjoy stuff that's not good without it being a stain on your character as an individual. And I think this clip right here, more than anything I've said in this video, is what you should use to judge Anderson's essay. I've sat down and enjoyed some of the most poorly written, cringiest, stupidest jokes in anime. I'll even admit it, I'm in my 30s. I've laughed at The Big Bang Theory. I've got friends who buy Funko Pops, friends who spend dozens of hours on CSGO, friends who have told me to play Sengoku rants, and yes, every single one of them knows who they are. Whether or not you enjoy something is not and has never been a mark of its overall quality. Likewise, value judgments aside, your enjoyment of any piece of media is not a barometer of your quality as an individual. This minigame seems totally fine. What makes this a guilty pleasure? Why should you feel ashamed of yourself? You enjoyed a game that had some enjoyable content in it, and you're acting like it's a statement that proves beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that you're some loser with horrible taste who can't possibly be listened to when it comes to analysis. This right here is CinemaSins nonsense. It is a collection of pithy complaints rolled up in a blanket labeled comedy while passed off to unsuspecting viewers as legitimate critique. The reason you shouldn't be listened to when it comes to your analysis, Joe, is because a significant chunk of your analysis was flat out fucking wrong. Your enjoyment of anything good or bad was never in question. It was your critique, your close reading of game design that deserved to be ignored. Any enjoyment you can squeeze out of any piece of art in this fucked up world is to be celebrated, and when the stakes are this low, you should never feel ashamed of yourself for what you do and don't enjoy. And maybe Anderson had a point when he said Mario Odyssey is no masterpiece. If you don't want to call this the best Mario game ever made or say that it's the perfect Mario game, no one is holding you at gunpoint saying you have to do it or else. You can call it a 5 out of 10. You're absolutely allowed to like what you like and dislike what you dislike. But the thing is, if you're gonna go online and make an extensive deep dive into all the reasons you think a game is terrible and give it all kinds of unreasonable levels of shit for doing things you've never hated in other Mario games, you might just be looking to piss people off instead of having a real conversation about what the game does wrong. And if you don't like the graphics and the controls and the moons and the puzzles and the cutscenes, then that's totally fine. But if you're trying to draw comparisons to the rest of the 3D Mario franchise and pretending that these games weren't always kind of mediocre, chances are good you're wearing some of the most rose-colored glasses ever worn by gamers before. And that's saying something. And that's the whole point of what I'm doing. I'm looking at Super Mario 64 and I'm asking what it really does. If you took Super Mario 64 to its logical extremes, you'd get a game with big levels and lots of stars, where you're not kicked out of a level every time you collect one. You'd have some of those stars locked behind story progress, which can only be collected when you've completed the previous star in the quest chain. You'd have lots of little 3D platforming challenges scattered around the level, and you'd still be able to plunge the depths and corners of every environment to search for secrets, battle the denizens of the Mario universe, and collect the powerful objects required to rescue the princess. Super Mario Odyssey took that idea and expanded on it. What if you could also control the creatures you meet? What if their powers made the difference between you progressing and you standing still? What if their myriad abilities, which have been explored countless times across countless releases in the franchise, could be used by you to change the way the world operates? You know what other critically acclaimed Mario game takes that idea and applies it to your ability to affect the game world? Paper Mario and Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Guess which games everyone says are untold masterpieces? Mario games haven't changed much in 20 years. They've gotten a little shinier, a little more high definition than they were previously, but the scope and content is roughly the same, and that's what everyone has bought every time they bought into the franchise. So of course Super Mario Odyssey is better than Super Mario 64. How could it not be when it takes the original idea almost verbatim and builds on it from a modern perspective? Instead of acknowledging this and saying Mario game is gonna Mario game, a significant chunk of people have gone out of their way to insist that some of the 3D Mario games are somehow significantly more legendary than anything else they've done to date, which is pretty ridiculous levels of cope. The fact of the matter is that despite the overwhelming success of Super Mario Odyssey, its actual scope and character isn't really much more than the modern iteration of the franchise. And while it is significantly better than Super Mario 64 in a myriad number of ways, it's not all that different from the same old Mario we got back on the Nintendo 64. The modern sensibilities of the game created a worthwhile experience that triggered that same nostalgia people felt for the games of yesteryear, that spark they thought they'd never get back, and they understandably declared this beautiful, highly polished platforming experience with a new gameplay twist as a visionary masterpiece because, well, if we're being honest, The game's gimmick is one of the most interesting things to hit 3D platformers in the last decade. Refusing to acknowledge that would be like saying Super Mario 64 wasn't legendary for being one of the first 3D platformers to do it. I honestly think that if you're desperate to say Super Mario Odyssey is no masterpiece, then I wouldn't be surprised if every Mario game was a disappointment to you. And that says a hell of a lot more about you than it does about Super Mario Odyssey. Thank you so much for watching. If you really liked my content, go ahead and give my Patreon a look. I would really appreciate your support. I'd also like to very much give a shout out to my friend Genevieve for lending me the DJI Mini microphone that I used to record the audio for this video. The upgraded audio is going to sound so much better when I finally publish this than it did in the previous video. So yeah, if you're looking forward to this, I believe that my next video is going to be about Sonic the Hedgehog, so really, again, thanks for watching. Looking forward to making the next one for you. Have a good one.